Fault Lines.
Coming to you live from across the divided states of America. Get ready for another edition, another show of the most disruptive show covering news, events, politics, and more across our country, as well as across the surface of our fragmented globe. In the Independent Corner, I am your political analyst, Shane Stranahan. And in the left corner, somewhere over there, we have Jamarl Thomas coming to you from his side of the political spectrum. And together, we are Fault Lines with Thomas and Stranahan. All right. Hope everybody's having a good morning. Hope you had a great weekend. We're going to get into COVID news right away here, and I've got to say, good news. There you are. Hey, Jamarl.
Where's my sound? So yeah, I'm here. I'm sorry, guys. Yeah.
There you are. No, you're good. You're good. That's all right. Let's get into COVID news. At least 994 new coronavirus deaths and 55,457 new cases were reported in the United States on February 15th. I'm going to note both of those are significantly lower than the numbers that we've seen recently. In either case, the deaths, less than 1,000 deaths. It's been a while since we've seen less than 1,000 deaths in a day. And 55,457 new cases. Last week, we were trumpeting the 4 straight days in a row we had of less than 100,000 cases. But even then, it was like 80,000, 90,000, that kind of thing. Below 60,000, about halfway between 50 and 60,000. That is dramatically lower. Now, given that, just to say this up front, it is Tuesday. We're coming on the tail of a 3-day weekend. And usually at the end of a weekend, you have the sort of collation period or something like this, where the numbers tend to be lower than they are later in the week because people are, on holiday, they're taking the weekend off, et cetera. And so I'm guessing the administrative officials who would have been counting this stuff simply aren't counting that stuff as quickly, whatever the case may be. Anyway, we'll see if those numbers come back up later this week. Having said that, I would say, well, this may not be cause to celebrate. It's still certainly something I'm very happy to see. Over the past week, there has been an average of 85,798 cases per day. That is a decrease of 41% from the average 2 weeks earlier. As of this morning, more than 27,738,000 people in the U.S. have been infected with the coronavirus, and over 486,000 have died from it. In Los Angeles County, elementary schools will be allowed to reopen for in-person learning starting Tuesday after county health officials announced they expect to reach the state's COVID-19 case threshold for reopening those campuses. The Los Angeles County Department of Public Health said in a news release on Monday, quote, "The state permits elementary schools to reopen as soon as we reach an adjusted case rate of 25 per 100,000. We are informing Los Angeles County schools tonight via an emailed letter that we expect to announce we have reached this threshold effective Tuesday, February 16th. In the ongoing saga of New York's undercounted nursing home deaths, Governor Andrew Cuomo on Monday almost apologized. You hear that? Almost apologized for stonewalling the release of full and accurate information on the COVID-19 deaths of New York's nursing home residents. In an afternoon press conference, Cuomo conceded better information on nursing home deaths should have come sooner, and said the failure to provide the data created, quote, a void, end quote, that has filled with what he referred to as misinformation and conspiracy theories. That's great. You pin off responsibility on conspiracy theories. I mean, having said that, I'm quoting him now, "I take responsibility for creating the void," quote, end quote, the governor said after days in which his administration has been battered for its nursing home decisions. I would say it's weeks. They're saying days. I would say weeks because we've been criticizing him on this one for weeks. He also said, quote, "We should have done a better job," quote, unquote. But again, there's no mea culpa. He did not give a formal apology. He's just saying he takes responsibility for it. But we've been hitting him on this for weeks. And I'm going to note he did this. He took responsibility, quote, unquote, on the other side of his aide coming out last week and saying that they were hiding those deaths because they didn't want to get charged by the Justice Department. So it wasn't after the initial report came out. It wasn't after the crime was revealed. It was after it was revealed that they were trying to hide.
And it was worse than that, Shane.
Tomorrow, we're going to be talking about this later.
Right here, New York Times. The since then, The number of deaths connected to New York nursing homes and long-term care facilities has only ballooned to about 15,000 confirmed and presumed deaths from 12,743 in late January as of this week. The administration released the latest figures as a result of a court order following a 6-month battle between Cuomo administration and the Empire Center, a conservative-leaning think tank that requested a full accounting of the nursing home deaths under the state's Freedom of Information law. They had to rip it out of his hands. They had to rip it out of their hands.
They did. A six-month legal battle with the FOIA request. So, and your point is that it's effectively ongoing. That's just come out recently. It's not like something that they did in last summer that they're now ashamed of. These are recent events that he's taken responsibility for, although he hasn't taken responsibility for those recent events. Again, what he took responsibility for was, quote unquote, creating this void of not talking about it, not talking about the numbers. I guess, he's making the problem in this case, the conspiracy theories that he says arose to explain what he did and not what he did. Does that make sense?
It does make sense. That does make sense. Because basically what it sounds like is that Cuomo did not want to get hit by Donald Trump and the federal investigators and all of this other stuff. Because Donald Trump, if you remember, started bringing up the fact that Cuomo have all of these people dead, and yet liberals are giving him an entire pass on the fact that he has all these people dead. And so right here, exactly.
And they were. He got an Emmy.
We were in a position where we weren't sure if we were going to give it to the Department of Justice or what we give to you guys, and what we're starting was going to be used against us, and we weren't sure if it was going to be used for investigations. Mrs. DeRosa told lawmakers. DeRosa is the secretary of Cuomo, and she basically said, "Look, we didn't want to get hit by this with this information. We buried it. They buried it." So, yeah.
So is Biden going to come down on Cuomo? We were talking about this the other day over the weekend when it was just us talking. But this is what I wonder is, so Cuomo's trying to hide this information from Trump's White House. He's trying to hide it from the Department of Justice because they're worried about criminal crackdown. Well, is Biden going to do the same, or is he going to avoid it because Cuomo is a Democrat? And if Biden doesn't do that, I honestly, I'm curious whether or not he will, or what they're going to do. If they decide to investigate it, it's going to be in a Biden administration, and I doubt that Cuomo is going to have to face too harsh a penalty for it. But we'll see. But you get where I'm going with this, Jamarl. Is Biden going to throw the weight of his party, throw the weight of his administration at Cuomo to try to investigate this? Do you have any opinion on that?
So it's interesting. Some Democrats that are in New York are apoplectic, and they're calling for investigations themselves. Because you can, it's clear why. It looks bad. It looks very bad. And if you're a Democrat and you're defending Cuomo on this, it makes you look bad because the public has a clear understanding of what this is. Cuomo was embarrassed. The guy who wrote the book on leadership, the guy who got the Emmy, the guy who's doing the news conferences. And then you find out that guy has all of those deaths on his conscience. So what is that guy supposed to do? Like, how do you reconcile taking the Emmy with 40,000 or 30,000 deaths, and then you find out that number was halved to make you look better than what it was? How do you reconcile that? You reconcile it by keeping moving and basically grifting. We did great. I sleep great at night. That's what you do. That's what you do. Just mendacity, taking the place of actual good governance. So yeah. Fascinating case. I would like to point out that we were right on this.
Now that he's come out with,
by the way.
Yes. Yeah, we were talking about this for multiple weeks before the rest of the media started to catch up to it. We'll come back to this later. We've got a lot more headlines to get through. South Korea's spy agency said Tuesday that according to a South Korean lawmaker, North Korean hackers tried to break into the computer systems of pharmaceutical giant Pfizer in a search for information on a coronavirus vaccine and treatment technology. And in Peru, the country's foreign minister has stepped down amid a furor over government officials being vaccinated against the coronavirus, even before the country began rolling out doses to healthcare workers. President Francisco Sagasti said that he had accepted Elizabeth Astede's resignation and an investigation was underway into other senior public officials who had received early doses of the COVID-19 vaccine. Deputy Health Minister Luis Suarez Ognio has also resigned over reports that he got vaccinated ahead of healthcare workers. In national political news, pretty much everybody, I'm sure, saw this happen, but let's get into it. Former President Donald Trump was acquitted by the Senate on Saturday of the charge that he incited the insurrection on January 6th. The impeachment trial ended with 57 senators, including 7 Republicans, finding Trump guilty, well short of the 2/3 majority needed to convict. Over the course of a week of testimony, House impeachment managers laid out the case that Trump was directly responsible for the deadly assaults on the U.S. Capitol carried out by a mob of his supporters. Trump's attorneys countered by arguing that his baseless claims of election fraud were protected by the First Amendment and that the Senate lacked the constitutional authority to convict a president who was no longer in office. Several GOP senators cited the latter argument in explaining their decision to acquit. Senate Minority Leader Mitch McConnell said Trump was, quote, practically and morally responsible, end quote, for the violence at the Capitol. This was in a scathing speech following the final vote, but he said he voted not guilty because he believed it would be unconstitutional to convict a former president. Had the Senate voted to convict Trump, a second vote could have been held to determine whether he should be banned from holding future public office. And my assumption is, if they had impeached him, if they had convicted him, then they would have done that second vote, because that would have been at this point the entire point of the impeachment. He's no longer in office. The only other, practical legal aim there would be to keep him from taking future office. In our next headline, we're going to come back to impeachment, of course, later in the show, so stay tuned for that. But we've got more headlines to get to. At least 6 deaths have been linked to a dangerous winter storm system that's endangering lives and breaking records across the United States. Millions of businesses and homes in Texas are without power and heat as the electric system struggles to meet the demand. City officials in Abilene, Texas announced Monday night that all city water services had been shut off due to the historic winter storm and cold. And I've heard testimony from people who are in Texas. It is bad. Think about it. It's extremely cold. You get your power shut off. Now, in some places, you get your water shut off. That is the worst possible time, other than, I guess, an extreme heat wave, for you to have your power shut off. At least with a cold, you can bundle up if you got the stuff for it. In the heat, if your power goes, a lot of people die. And sadly, we have seen death. We have seen deaths, and hopefully they're fixing whatever the heck led to this, because that's, again, millions of people without power, without heat. That's dangerous. In international news, President Biden's vow to expand U.S. engagement with allies will be put to the test later this week when he participates in a virtual meeting with leaders of the world's wealthiest democracies and then delivers remarks to the annual Munich Security Conference. Administration officials say the online gathering Friday of the leaders of the G7, that's the U.S., the U.K., France, Germany, Italy, Canada, and Japan, will focus mainly on global COVID-19 responses and the world economy, with President Biden planning also to press for ways the group can better work together in dealing with China. Myanmar's deposed leader Aung San Suu Kyi was hit with a second charge on Tuesday of violating the country's disaster management laws. That charge has also been leveled against the country's former president, Win Myint. The first charge against Suu Kyi related to the importation of walkie-talkies. Both of those, I would say, are pretexts, charged against her after she was already taken out of the running, after the coup. The lawyer has not yet made contact with either the former state secretary or the former president, although Suu Kyi is expected to appear in court by video link this Wednesday. She's the state secretary, by the way, which is sort of like that Myanmar's version of prime minister, the head of state. In our next headline, at least 60 people have drowned after a boat capsized in the Democratic Republic of Congo. Some 300 people have been rescued, but as many as 200 others are unaccounted for following the accident on the Congo River. Locals said the boat hit a rock east of the capital, Kinshasa, while traveling at night, which is prohibited. Many people use boats to travel long distances in the Democratic Republic of the Congo because of its poor road network. The European Court of Human Rights has rejected a complaint against German authorities' refusal to prosecute an officer who ordered the deadly bombing in 2009 of 2 fuel tankers in northern Afghanistan. Scores of people died when U.S. Air Force jets bombed the tankers hijacked by the Taliban near Kunduz. The strike was ordered by the commander of the German base in Kunduz, George Klein, who feared insurgents could use the trucks to carry out attacks. And Iran State TV reported on Tuesday that Iranian and Russian militaries have kicked off a joint naval drill in the Indian Ocean aimed at boosting security of maritime trade in the region. Apparently, units from Iran's Navy and the powerful Revolutionary Guards Navy will take part in the exercise dubbed, quote, Iran-Russia Maritime Security Belt 2021, end quote, in the northern part of the Indian Ocean, spanning a stretch of about 17,000 kilometers. It's a little bit over 10,000 miles. And you know what? I'll throw this last one in here. The U.S.'s top infectious diseases expert, Anthony Fauci, has been awarded a prestigious $1 million Israeli prize for his commitment to science. Dr. Fauci, who was often at odds with former President Trump over how to handle the pandemic, was given the Dan David Prize for defending science, quote unquote. He was also praised for advocating for COVID vaccines and for his leadership on HIV research and AIDS relief. Dr. Fauci, 80, has advised 7 U.S. presidents. For some reason, I mean, I don't know what this is a testament to, but I'd assume that Fauci was a little bit younger than 80. He's doing pretty well. He doesn't look 80, certainly. That's admittedly not the most important aspect of this prize being given to him. You can debate whether recommending that people not wear masks as a white lie, keep PPE in stock for doctors and hospitals, but in the process, muddying the waters, practically everybody who's curious about whether or not they should wear a mask. You can argue whether that is good science, but maybe that's good public policy. I don't know. With that, though, we've got to go into a break. You're listening to Fault Lines with Thomas and Stranahan. When we come back, we're going to be in our soapbox segment, talking with Jamarl. Be back on the other side of this short break.
Fault Lines. We are talking
24 hours a day, 7 days a week.
You are listening.
We give you the most essential out of the endless information space.
Radio Sputnik, telling the untold.
Are you bored? Are you lonely? Do you need a hug? Well, we can't give you that, but we can keep you up to date on Radio Sputnik.
Fault Lines.
Welcome back to Fault Lines on Radio Sputnik. My name is Jamarl Thomas. I'm joined by my co-host Shane Stranahan, coming to you live out of our station in Washington, D.C. If you guys live in the area, you can catch us on radio at 105.5 FM and 1390 AM. We're also kicking around in Kansas City at 102.9 FM and 104.7 FM. If you guys are digging what Shane and I are putting down, whatever platform you're consuming this content on, give us a like and share that audio or video. If you want to join in on the conversation, you can send us a chat, a tweet, and of course, you can reach us by phone at 202-521-1320. That is 202-521-1320. Your engagement helps make this show what it is, so definitely don't be shy. Betrayal of oath of office. Each person that gets elected into the government of the United States, especially the federal government and especially the president, above all, has a duty to protect and to serve. Protect being the Constitution, its oath to office, the American public, etc., etc., etc. They have certain responsibilities, and at least 43 of them did not in any way live up to those responsibilities and betrayed America itself in their vote. Don't take my word for it. Take Mitch McConnell's word for it. Donald Trump gets impeached. They go to the Senate to have the trial. There weren't supposed to be any witnesses called or anything else, but based on the lie that Donald Trump's defense team kept trying to push forward, there was information that impeached the credibility of that lie. Now, the witness didn't eventually get called because there was all sorts of hysteria in the crowd the moment that very particular point about impeachment came up. You had Romney and Ron Johnson almost getting into a fight. Ron Johnson wouldn't own up to it, but the fight was basically on whether to call any witnesses because the witnesses would have directly impeached Trump's credibility. 3 charges. And to me, all 3 of them are unanswered. But the last one definitely stings, definitely is unanswered. And the Republicans, especially Mitch McConnell, doesn't even try to answer it. McConnell accepts the arguments that Democrats are putting forward, but uses a loophole to get out of doing his job, impeaching the president for cynical political calculus. 3 charges, basically. And insurrection, basically impeachment, pushing the insurrection. For 2 months, Donald Trump went out and said that he won an election by a landslide that he clearly lost. We gave him the benefit of the doubt. The only thing he had to do was show it, prove it. You have the presidency, you have the federal department in regards to going out and looking at all these things. You're supposed to be a billionaire, you have all of this money. But very shortly, in a very short time, we realized that what Donald Trump was basically telling people is that the communists was working with the CIA to get a witch doctor to raise Hugo Chavez from the dead in order to work with Kemp to cheat America, to cheat Trump himself. It got more ludicrous the more they said it. And fact of the matter is, when Sidney Powell is making that argument and she's a part of your team, no person in their right mind. Honestly, you are basically saying that America are full of idiots if you're going to make that argument. And whether you believe that argument or not, secondary to the point. People can be convicted for things that they should know, whether or not they know them or not. If I am holding a baby over a ledge and I drop the baby by accident, I had no intention of dropping the baby. The judge doesn't believe that I had an intention of dropping the baby, but what the judge would say is that you should have known better. You should have known the risks associated with the behaviors to which you were taking. Yes, you can't yell fire into a crowded theater. And this issue and the problem of leadership is known and understood, which is the reason why nobody ever hits that rail of elections. Maybe they should hit that rail of elections, but they don't. And the reason they don't is because they understand that the moment that you get into a questioning of legitimacy, the fabric of your country can utterly and entirely break down. If people, large amounts, let's say 40 million, no longer believes that the elections are valid and the elections are legit, you run into a problem of leadership. And if you want to know, go look at some of the African countries where the other party refuses to concede and the group believes that other party, and you have basically a civil war. This is a big deal that Donald Trump is doing, which is the reason why they don't do it. Even Al Gore, when Al Gore knew he was being cheated, what did Al Gore do? He gavelled down one African American after the next that kept saying we were disenfranchised. That's what happened. I agree that the Democrats screamed and howled about Trump for all and Trump or Russia. But again, if you notice, the politics are specific. Trump and Russia using social media to infect the minds of the public, the electoral system was spared. Yes, you could say that's clever politics, but it is politics. And Donald Trump decided to hit the rail. More importantly, on the second point, they knew that they weren't supposed to have a march. Donald Trump explicitly knew that he wasn't supposed to have a march. He did it anyway. Pushed those people to the Capitol. And more important and more damning, he didn't call them off when he knew that they were there. He knew that they were there screaming, Trump, 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 as the officer died, laying on the ground, beat by a flag. And his last words that he heard were Trump, Trump, Trump. Trump wouldn't call him off. Let's hear Mitch McConnell, because Mitch McConnell agrees with everything that I just said. And yet, Mitch McConnell still comes back as not guilty. Let's play this clip.
Former President Trump's actions preceded the riot were a disgraceful dereliction of duty. There's no question, none, that President Trump is practically and morally responsible for provoking the events of the day. No question about it. The people who stormed this building believed they were acting on the wishes and instructions of their president. And having that belief was a foreseeable consequence of the growing crescendo of false statements, conspiracy theories, and reckless hyperbole, which the defeated president kept shouting into the largest megaphone on planet Earth. These criminals were carrying his banners, hanging his flags, and screaming their loyalty to him. It was obvious that only President Trump could end this. He was the only one who could. Former aides publicly begged him to do so. Loyal allies frantically called the administration. The president did not act swiftly. He did not do his job. He didn't take steps so federal law could be faithfully executed and order restored. No. Instead, according to public reports, he watched television happily. Happily. If President Trump were still in office, I would have carefully considered whether the House managers proved their specific
Stop right there. Stop right there.
But in
Stop
this
right
case, the question is
Mitch
moot
McConnell
because
is putting up a wall. This invisible wall is here. And I think he's entirely guilty, completely guilty. He did all of this stuff wrong. If he was in office, I would have, but he's not in office. That's an invisible wall. That wall doesn't have to be there. McConnell is entirely crafting that wall. He has all the power in the world to make the choice to impeach Trump. He's choosing not to do it. But he wants that statement in the record. He wants it shown that, yes, I think Donald Trump is guilty, but no, I'm going to have my own dereliction of duty by not pushing through with the legal consequences of such an act. McConnell knows Trump is guilty, and yet McConnell refuses to impeach. That is a dereliction of duty if I don't know what is. And one last clip. Pelosi. Pelosi is apoplectic. She should be. Let's play the clip. This is theater in part, but there's reality to this also. Let's play Pelosi's clip real quick. And Shane, I'm coming to you after.
What we saw in that Senate today was a cowardly group of Republicans who apparently have no options because they were afraid to defend their job, respect the institution in which they
Let's stop right there for a moment, because I want to get the last part in.
That it would be that.
You have Trump team caught in a lie. And Sunday, it was raucous in the Senate. And what basically boiled down to was Trump's team is insisting that Trump didn't know anything. And if he did, he would have helped. Well, the problem is that the argument with McCarthy, Senate leader, where he is on the phone with Trump screaming at him for help, screaming for him to call the mob off. And then there's one conversation where he asks Trump, do you know who the F I am? Because Donald Trump basically makes the point to say, hey, maybe those people care about the election more than you do. You have another call where Donald Trump mistakenly calls Mike Lee. And Mike Lee passes the phone to Tuberville, the person who he wants, Tuberville, and he tells him, Mike Lee was rushed out. It's an emergency. I need to get off the phone. They're coming into the Capitol, meaning Trump knew and didn't act. Shane, what are your thoughts? I mean, because McConnell basically said, yeah, I think he's guilty, but I don't have the power to do anything about it. And that is nonsense.
I mean, we've talked about this. Apparently the glove didn't fit, so they voted not to acquit. I mean, a joke, admittedly. They weren't going to do this anyway.
Statements and specifically, because you're right, we've had the back and forth on it. But McConnell basically says, yeah, I think he's guilty, but I'm not going to do anything about it. That seems horrendous to me.
I think that for a lot of people, they would see that as sort of common sense, because a lot of people don't tend to see the impeachment as just a political statement. They see it as the ability that Congress has to indict a sitting president and force him out of office. And keeping Trump from holding future political office, well, that is part of impeachment, isn't front and center for a lot of folks. And so for the average member of the public, whatever, looking at this, I think that's going to strike them, unless you're a Democrat, unless you're ardently for impeachment, or you're in the political class and you see this like you do as a political tool, used to sort of demarcate a line in the sand and say, we're not going to cross this ever again, that kind of thing. I think a lot of folks in the public are like, okay, this isn't the avenue for it. Trump's already out of office. And that's about where they stop on it. So for you, and for some other folks, I can see why McConnell not doing this is a stark political ploy. But whether you're looking at what the average American probably thinks, my guess is they would side with him, or they wouldn't care. Or whether you're looking at his immediate political calculus, which I don't even know that you got to, which is McConnell can't push back too hard against Trump, but he needs to remove himself from Trump, as fully as he can. So by condemning Trump, he's tried to do the second, and by refusing to impeach Trump, he's, not done the first fully, but he's kind of done it. He's kind of pulled away from
dancing between the raindrops, and he's separating himself from Trump without separating himself from Trump in the legal sense. Look, he's a cynical politician, and he's good at politics. I know people hit McConnell, but he knows what he's doing in the political space. 53% of U.S. adults said Trump should not be allowed to run for office again. 50% said they will vote to convict Trump in the Senate if given a vote. This was Reuters. A poll from YouGov and Economist released Friday found that 53% of people believe Trump should not be allowed to run for office again. But the catch is impeachment. Reuters found that 71% of U.S. adults believe Trump was partially responsible for the riot. Half of Republicans who were surveyed, polled, agreed that Trump was partially responsible. And look, this gets to the whole reason why you have Republicans leaving the party, because they were greatly bothered by what happened. Even if you're a Republican, even if you hated the government, even if you're angry at the government, this might have been a bridge too far. So let's do this. Let's take a break. Let's come back to Michelle Whitty. That's going to be another great conversation on Cuomo. You guys are listening to Fault Lines with Thomas and Stranahan. We will be back in a moment.
Fault Lines.
You're listening to Radio Sputnik.
Great shot. Even better. Let's get one more, just to be sure.
Are you a young photographer the world needs to know? Bring your images to more eyes through the Andre Stenin contest. Open to both artists and photojournalists, there are dozens of categories to enter and compete for a share of serious prize money. And, more importantly, international recognition of your work. Learn more about how to enter at stenincontest.com. Point, shoot, win.
Fault Lines.
Welcome back to Fault Lines on Radio Sputnik. My name is Jamal Thomas. I'm joined by my co-host Shane Stranahan, coming to you live out of our station in Washington, D.C. Joining us for a really good, interesting story is Michelle Whitty, Sputnik News analyst and co-host of Political Misfits, airing here on Radio Sputnik Monday through Friday from 12 noon to 2 p.m. Eastern. Michelle, welcome to the show.
Hi, guys. How are you? Hi, guys.
We are doing fine. And this is your first time, I think, appearance on Fault Lines, at least with us, me as the host. So welcome to Fault Lines.
Thank you. Thank you.
I wanted...
It's so nice, guys. It's really nice.
Well,
it's good to be a guest. I'm hanging out. I've got my coffee. I don't have to have my video stream on. It's very relaxing.
Excellent.
So
let's get into it.
Yeah.
Cuomo. We've been focusing on Cuomo on this show because we've been aghast by the amount of people that have basically died. Cuomo getting a pass on it. Not just Cuomo getting a pass on it, chest thumping and spiking the football as if he nailed it. So this starts off in a ProPublica piece, going all the way back for a while. March 25th, Cuomo said he feared that an onslaught of COVID victims would overwhelm hospitals, so he issued an order that required nursing homes to accept COVID-19 patients being discharged from hospitals so as long as they were, quote, medically stable. Now, this also went further and basically saying no tests, meaning you can't test to see whether or not the person is COVID. And on top of that, this ended up causing a lot of deaths that Cuomo didn't necessarily want to own. Meaning, if you send people into a hospital, and those people are going into nursing homes, and those are the weakest patients that are available, and those patients die, and those doctors die, and those nurses die, because basically your choice refused or didn't allow them to determine who was ill. That gets compounded by a provision or mandate that basically protects those companies from lawsuits. This gets worse. An investigation by Office of State Attorney General Letitia James, issued Thursday, this is NPR, found that the death toll was far worse than officials disclosed. A larger number of nursing home residents died from COVID-19 than the New York Department of Health data reflects, the preliminary report concludes. Now this caused all sorts of things to hit the fan, because the question became, oh my God, were they lying? CNN, Secretary to Governor Cuomo, Melissa DeRosa, told lawmakers in a private virtual meeting that the state was concerned about the Department of Justice preliminary inquiry into COVID-19 deaths in New York nursing homes, as well as attention from former President Donald Trump, who was tweeting about Cuomo and other Democratic governors' handling of the nursing homes. The sources participated in the call. Meaning, Cuomo was undercutting the deaths by half because he knew that Donald Trump's was potentially going to investigate him. He knew Donald Trump was tweeting about him. And at the exact same time this is taking place, he is getting an Emmy. He is doing these articles, like these video conferences about how awesome he is and how horrible Donald Trump is. And on top of that, he releases this audio clip. Let's play the clip, Andre, talking about how well he sleeps at night.
I put my head on the pillow at night, saying I saved lives. That's how I sleep at night.
He saves lives, Michelle. Yeah. That's how he sleeps at night. And just to put a final point on it, and I'm going to hand it over to you. Right here, New York Times, got his hand on the partial transcript. We were in a position where we weren't sure if we were going to have to go to the Department of Justice, give the information, or that we would have to give you guys. And we started saying this is going to be used against us. And we weren't sure if there was going to be an investigation. They were concerned. The moment that the public internalized that Cuomo, for cynical political reasons, undercount the number of deaths and undercount his incompetence, the public was pissed. And that's to put it mildly. And this one last point. Since the number of nursing home deaths connected to New York nursing home and long-term care facility has only ballooned to about 15,000 confirmed and presumed deaths from 12,000, the administration released the latest figures as a result of a court order following a 6-month battle between Cuomo and the Empire Center. That's astonishing. He didn't even put the information out on his own. It was yanked out of his hands. Now, you've been following this story too.
Yep.
This is phenomenal, especially the whitewashing that apparently is now taking place on Cuomo. Please explain, please go in on this.
Disgusting. It's disgusting. It's disgusting, and it's been disgusting for a while. And, when you read that CNN headline, I started looking because, we talked about this I think it was on Thursday night or Friday when this came out. And the first CNN story about this admission by the aide, Melissa DeRosa, when she was saying, the administration just froze, we were scared. It was so vague. You couldn't actually even understand the controversy, whereas every other media outlet was at least reporting it in such a way that you could say, all right, this is a story about how the administration decided not to give relevant information to the right agencies and bodies, and in this case, political party, right? Because she was apologizing to Democrats for putting them in a bad political position. She wasn't saying, we're sorry we got scared and did something that was going to make people lose their lives. She was saying, we're awfully sorry that you had to go into these meetings with Republicans looking like we weren't on the same team, which is a very different thing. But, CNN's got Chris Cuomo. And part of I think, Andrew Cuomo's whole star turn during this pandemic was because he got to spend night after night chilling with his brother on CNN, joking about what a great job he was doing. I mean, it's just the story of Andrew Cuomo. Yeah, I feel like, all right, I feel like it makes a larger point to me. I think one of the things you start to see as you get a little bit older, and I'm obviously, just for all you listeners who can't see me, very young, really, really young, wise beyond my years, all right? But you start to see how fast we forget extremely relevant history. You know what I mean? It's all of a sudden Iraq War I, what even was that? Iraq War II, that has nothing to do with any of the ways we are drumming up reasons to go to war today. No parallels there. Who can even remember? That was 15 years ago, right? Ooh, I don't know. And so we're constantly being told that it's we're in this cycle of constantly having revelations about bad things that were happening 10 and 15 and 20 years ago, but being told that they're not, no, everything's different now. It's not happening now. And with Cuomo, I feel like that whole cycle has just completely collapsed, where he can simultaneously be governing over the worst COVID outbreak in the country and seeing the highest, for a long time, the highest death toll in the country. I think it might have been surpassed by either case numbers or death numbers by California, Texas by now, but it took a very long time. So he can simultaneously be doing a very bad job by any metric, right? You can see this in real time and be rehabilitated at the same time. So
I'm
as you
okay
mentioned,
with people making mistakes.
He writes books. He gets an Emmy.
And I'm okay with people making mistakes and are contrite. You know, I screwed up. I did a horrible job. There was a lot going on at once. I was somewhat incompetent. We needed good governance. But that's not what he did. That's not what he did. He had the temerity to receive an Emmy. He knew his crimes. He knew his sins.
Yeah.
And he took the Emmy. And he told other people how horrible they were and how great I am, and then blamed his own team. Like, he would not take responsibility at all for his own failings.
And here's the other thing, Jamal, because you're right. People should be able to make mistakes. But I don't think this was a mistake. The other thing Cuomo did was just decide, you know what? All of those plans that our public health officials have drawn up to respond to exactly this kind of emergency, we don't need them. I'm going to put all of the, the pandemic rollout in the hands of my friends. That's not a mistake.
That's right.
Right? That's like bad, and it's a bad action. You know what I mean? And it's like, oh shoot, I copy and pasted the wrong, template.
No. He did this to protect his own rear.
Oh God.
Yeah, they were protecting their own rear. They didn't want to deal with the criticism,
criticism,
the honest, reasonable criticism at their failures.
Yeah, but I feel like some mistakes at some level are disqualifying. If you want a job with that much responsibility, then you have to actually take that responsibility. If you are Secretary of State and you do something that ends up with, for example, Libya going from a functioning state to just an absolute hellhole, I don't think you should be involved in matters of state anymore. You know what I mean? I think that level of a mistake is disqualifying. And I think in this case, cowardice should be disqualifying in our public officials. And so that's what basically DeRosa was initially admitting to. We were scared. We were scared Donald Trump was going to use the truth of our COVID outbreak to come after us. And this is not a defense of Trump or saying he was also doing anything not with political calculations in mind. But don't be scared. If you're a coward, get a different job. Don't be a governor. Don't be a police officer. Don't take on that level of responsibility if you're going to crumble to pieces when it's actually tested and when we actually need you to do the important leadership work that we elected you for. That's how I feel, Jamal.
So what about Biden then? I mean, Trump would have gone after Cuomo on this hard. Now Biden's in office. Like you're saying, the whole point of this aide making this statement was two Democrats apologizing politically for the damage that she was doing to them, and that they would, face pressure on this. Do you see Biden trying to push on Cuomo on this? And if so, how illusory will that pushback be? Will it be strong? Will it be substantive? What do you see coming out from this, from the Biden administration and the DOJ, Michelle?
I think that's a good question. I would not expect the Biden administration to go hard after the states unless it becomes really politically necessary. You know what I mean? Unless this Cuomo thing really snowballs and it's obviously getting a lot of national media attention, but I don't see calls except, from smaller quarters for anything really seriously to be done. Because I think the Biden administration really has a strong motivation to pin as much of the blame for what's happened in this country during the pandemic squarely on the Trump administration and nothing else. So yes, I don't see Biden. Yeah, I don't see Biden going after states. I don't see Biden doing anything unless unless it's going to be good PR for him, right? Unless Cuomo really goes down. And I don't really see that. I don't see that happening with the state of our media. And, Chris, I'm not going to say like Chris Cuomo controls our whole media ecosystem or anything. But Andrew Cuomo's been a Democratic darling for a very long time. And I don't think that's going to turn around really fast, especially because, he has the same power he always had. He has the same donors he has always had. He's serving them. He continues to serve them. So I think people are hoping this is just a sort of tempest in a teapot.
But again, another instance of a state governor who's extremely unpopular with people in his state based on positions that he's taken, what he's done, screwing up like this on a large scale, killing thousands of people. and nevertheless having support from the party nationwide. We need to go into a break, but we are glad to be joined by Michelle Witte. She is the co-host of Political Misfits on Radio Sputnik. That show airs every Monday through Friday from noon to 12 p.m. Eastern. And you're listening to Fault Lines with Thomas and Stranahan. We're going into a break, but we will be back with Michelle on the other side in just a minute.
Fault Lines.
What do we want?
News, politics, and culture.
When do we want it?
Wait, we weren't finished. News, politics, and culture without the red and blue spin.
Okay, so now when do you want it?
Daily from noon to 2 p.m. Eastern Time.
Okay, satisfied now?
Never. Tune into Political Misfits on 105.5 FM in Washington, D.C. and on 102.9 and 104.7 FM in Kansas City, Missouri. Daily for our analytical fix. Don't surrender.
Fault Lines.
Welcome back to Fault Lines on Radio Sputnik. My name is Jamal Thomas. I'm joined by my co-host Shane Stranahan, coming to you live out of our station in Washington, D.C. So we were hitting on the Cuomo case, but there's another case that's taking place right now that is actually pretty mind-blowing, and it's taking place in Brazil. So what we found out was that in a new book by Celso Castro, former head of Brazilian armed forces, Vilas Boas, has basically confessed to a plot to get Bolsonaro in office. Now, this had a joint work with the United States in part, worked with the CIA to get certain information on candidates like Rosa in order to get her out of contention because they wanted to run against somebody who was basically a nobody. It also goes into the car wash case dealing with Lula and whether or not Lula was going to remain in prison. And what he basically makes the point about is General Vilas Boas, and he is apparently on his deathbed or is dying. He revealed how 15 senior generals drafted a text threatening a tone which posted on social media by Vilas Boas, and it read on air shortly afterwards by an anchorman, William Bonner, during Globo's Jornal's basically a national flagship show. I am murdering the language on this. But basically, it's read out in a flagship show. This was a threat. The threat was received, and the person who was responsible for making one of those votes in the court decided to keep Lula in jail. As a result of Lula being in jail, he wasn't able to run against Bolsonaro, and Bolsonaro ends up winning the race. There's an even second part. After the election, Vilas Boas and Bolsonaro praised each other publicly. When he left his position to serve as special advisor to the presidency, Boas, now already sick and confined to a wheelchair, publicly told the president, "You bring the necessary renewal and release of ideological bonds that hijack free thinking." Bolsonaro responded, "Thank you, Commander Vilas Boas. We have talked about what we've talked about will die between us. You are responsible for me being here." Isn't that astonishing? And so basically what we've been saying the whole time was that the fix was in. That Lula was basically cheated. And right now we have the person basically admitting, yes, that's exactly what we did. And he did it on his deathbed. That is a bombshell. What are your thoughts on this? We were covering this ourselves.
Yeah, I mean, this is the first that I've heard of this new report, so it is very interesting. I mean, it goes to show like that the whole car wash operation, I feel like it's sort of illustrative of the way we talk about corruption and the way we use corruption. I'm talking we in the United States, but the way we use corruption to justify whatever we want to do or whoever we want to support in other countries. Because initially when the car wash investigation started, there was a lot of support for it. There was a lot of support, from the US, from other countries, from the left, people saying, oh, this is good. This is going to get into, kickbacks between the national oil companies and big corporations. Like, of course, this is the kind of stuff we want to be ferreting out. And then, of course, what did it turn into? It turned into just a great excuse to shackle any politician that was a threat because they were too popular. It was used, obviously, as you mentioned, to jail Lula. I don't think that was used against what I'm missing her name, Dilma Rousseff, right? The president who was thrown out of power for something that happens all the time that they were able to present as some sort of like financial trickery. I think it was like funding a program before the funds were actually in the account to pay for the program, which is done all the time.
All of them had
they were like,
charges
no.
on their heads.
Yeah.
And it was like selective justice to get rid of her. Like, it was astonishing. All of these guys are like pointing their fingers at her, and all of these guys are guilty themselves. And it was used to get her right here.
Yeah.
Leaked tape of the coup. Senator Romero Juca was famously caught on tape talking about the military as an integral part of the Grand National Agreement that was the plot to remove Delma in 2016. Quote, I'm talking to generals, military commanders. Everything is quiet. The guys say they will guarantee it. They are monitoring the MST, basically landless workers movement. I don't know what else to do. This is depicted in Petro Costa's Oscar-nominated documentary, Edge of Democracy. The fix was in.
I guess what is kind of funny is, again, like we're looking outside of our country and going, oh man, there was a conspiracy to bring the current leader to power. How weird. And then what if you just thought about our own Democratic primary? It's so easy to see corruption everywhere else. Because I'm not saying there's not, of course it's everywhere. But it's really hard to turn the lens, like the way that we are raised, this like strange and fantastical idea of American exceptionalism and the whole structure of our media system makes it very hard to see exactly the same corruption in our own system, and that is always really fascinating to me when we see these corruption scandals elsewhere, because we use it as a justification to perpetrate violence against other countries, to put our fingers on the election scales in other countries. But, when it comes to our own country, it's like, what? Oh, no. What are you talking about? There's no you're crazy. You're crazy if you think there was anything conspiratorial happening, in the primary. You're a nut job. It's always makes me laugh. It's sad, but...
Well, that is a natural segue. Let's get into the conversation. Thank you again, Michelle, for being with us. Let's talk about the impeachment. Let's move from the primary, which whether you're talking 2016 or 2020, I know you're talking 2020, but still, evidence of corruption there, evidence of fraud, evidence of the abuse of power. I would say extremely clearly in 2016. I was on the ground in Philly when Bernie was pushed out, and I remember the energy on the streets. There were people extremely pissed. I'll put it like this. There weren't that many people out there. There weren't that many Hillary supporters out there. Everybody to a person. It was like a wave of people. I remember it at night was pissed about Bernie getting pushed out. Carry us forward to 2020. I'm gonna bring us directly up to the impeachment. Let's skip over the primaries for a second. Trump just acquitted. We've been going back and forth on this on the show, like arguing about it, bickering. And I'm just curious, where do you land on this? Should Trump have been impeached? Do you see that as justified? What are your feelings about him being acquitted? What are your feelings about this whole process, Michelle?
Yeah, I mean, I think it is complicated because I think that while you could never expect the Democrats to really fight hard and really try to accomplish something, meaningful and with teeth, I think that it was important. And I do think that, I hear all the arguments from the left about, or arguments from a number of people saying, perhaps this, you could see this as a dangerous sort of expansion of our idea of what it is to incite violence, et cetera, et cetera. But I think it is, I think it is wholly reasonable to hold someone who is the president of the United States to a different standard. And I also would like to point out, he's been held to a different standard with regard to inciting violence on social media for years, as all of our leadership is, right? They're allowed to say things about the leaders of other countries or to threaten, national action against other countries that would get us, banned, right? For insinuating or suggesting the same kind of violence. So I do think it was reasonable to impeach him for that. I think, standing up in front of a crowd of angry people and telling them, you're not going to have a country anymore and you got to fight like hell. Like, I think it was definitely a reasonable thing to do. And I think a lot of people really needed to see, that something would at least be attempted. You know what I mean? I have a lot of sympathy for that. And I think that the Democrats actually made a very good case in terms of the material they presented and making it, showing what happened. So I
agree with you, Michelle.
I'm not mad at the process. I think it needed to happen, and I don't think it was a terrifying slippery slope or anything. I think that he bears that responsibility. You know, yeah. I mean, then of course they pulled their punches at the very end. And who was it? Senator Chris Coons or something coming out and saying, well, people wanted to go
He
for
basically
Valentine's
tells them
Day.
Biden's purview. He basically gives them the heads up. And it's like, look, Republicans are going to leave if you don't do this now.
Yeah.
Because they wanted to bring in witnesses. The Senate went into sheer hysteria when they wanted to bring in witnesses. And because basically they caught them in a lie. I mean, Trump's argument was basically, I didn't know anything about it. I didn't know Pence was in danger. Meaning, if you can ignore the first two ludicrous arguments that, Donald Trump just talks that way. Yeah, whatever. He's president of the United States. There's responsibility associated with that. And even if you ignore him telling those people to go to the Capitol, even though Donald Trump knew that they didn't have the permits for those people to go to the Capitol. That's a Greg Palace thing. You still get caught on the last one. Why didn't he call them back? He knew they were under assault. He didn't call them back. He was in an argument with McCarthy, minority leader in the House, basically screaming at him, who the F do you think you are? Call your mob off. Trump wouldn't do it. Hey, maybe they're more invested than you, McCarthy. And same thing with Pence. He knew Pence was in danger. That was one of the other things that they read into record, that he called. He was told by Mike Lee that Pence had just been removed out of here, or Tuberville, that he had just been removed, and Donald Trump had a clear understanding that they were in danger, and he still didn't call for help. Let's hear McConnell. I want you to hear McConnell's wording of this, because McConnell thinks Trump is guilty also, but he wouldn't vote. I want you to tell me what you think of McConnell's excuse here. Let's play the clip.
Former President Trump's actions preceded the riot were a disgraceful dereliction of duty. There's no question, none, that President Trump is practically and morally responsible for provoking the events of the day. No question about it. The people who stormed this building believed they were acting on the wishes and instructions of their president. And having that belief was a foreseeable consequence of the growing crescendo of false statements, conspiracy theories.
Let's stop right there.
And reckless
McConnell basically makes my argument, but then turns around and says, but he's not president, so I can't do anything about it. And that's his loophole. Yeah. What do you think of that loophole? That loophole seems ludicrous to me.
It's straight garbage. I mean, and here's the thing. Over and over in both parties, right, on both sides of the aisle, we have politicians using process arguments to avoid making moral decisions, even when they say there's a moral decision to be made. So I think sort of the highest level general principle here is that we need to fall out of love with some of these processes. We need to we need to reevaluate all of them so that we have structures that allow people to make moral decisions, or really, practically speaking, don't give so much cover to the likes of Mitch McConnell or the likes of Nancy Pelosi, all of these folks, to say, oh, well, I wanted to do the right thing, but hands are tied because, Senate rules or House procedures or the Constitution. All of these things can be changed if it turns out they're constantly preventing us from doing what it identify as the right thing,
I hear what you're saying, but I'm worried about that kind of thing. I mean, because if you take those processes off, if you strip away the sort of more or less superficial laws, which again you can change, who's going to most benefit from that? And I think it depends on the case, but by and large, I would say that those who are already in power would most benefit. We got less than a minute, but in 15 or so seconds, any quick response, Michelle?
No, I mean, Shane, I think that is always something to bear in mind. And I think the thing to do is try to walk the line between recognizing that, but also recognizing that that can kind of be a paralysis, or at least appear to be paralysis to regular people, and try to think, how do we actually fight for the kind of change we need without sort of exposing the vulnerable, but also not just sort of sitting around going, can't be done, hands are tied,
I hear what you're saying on that. We got to continue this conversation some other time. That was the voice of Michelle Witte, Sputnik News analyst and co-host of Political Misfits. That show airs here on Radio Sputnik Monday through Friday from noon to 2 p.m. Eastern. You're listening to Fault Lines with Thomas and Stranahan. Back in just a minute with headlines.
Listening to Radio Sputnik. Telling the untold.
Fault Lines.
Live from the divided states of America, welcome to your daily inoculation for propaganda. In the left corner, I am the indefatigable, the ever-vigilant last antibody to a sick and seizing political system, your political analyst, Jamarl Thomas.
And in the independent corner, I am your political analyst, Jane Stranahan.
And that would mean you are listening to Fault Lines with Thomas and Stranahan. I was about to say, that would mean that you're listening to us, or there's another dimension, but even in that dimension, it would still be us. It might be, Shane Thomas and Jamarl Stranahan, but it will still be versions of us. I'm thinking about that. We have a good guest that's going to come up, Grant Cameron, and he is going to be able to talk about all of the new stuff with Bob Bigelow and everything else. So I'm really excited about that one. Just came to mind thinking about the dimensional stuff. But let's get into the headlines. In the news, at least 994 new coronavirus deaths and 55,457 new cases were reported in the United States on February 15th. Over the past week, there's been an average of 85,878 cases per day, a decrease of 41% from the average 2 weeks earlier. As of Tuesday morning, more than 27,738,000 people in the United States have been infected with coronavirus, and over 486,000 have died. I do want to point out that the 994 is less than the 1,000, 2,000, 3,000, and 4,000s that we've been seeing over the past several months. Let's hope that number is legit. Oftentimes when coming in off the weekend, that number goes lower. However, even last week, that number was still trending lower. And even when the number popped up, it was still 1 day pop up or 2 day pop up, as opposed to being like 4,000 consistently throughout the course of the day. So this could be a trend downward, and I would hope that it is. Elementary schools in Los Angeles County will be allowed to reopen for in-person learning starting today, after the county health officials announced they expected to reach the state's COVID-19 case threshold for reopening in those campuses. The Los Angeles Department of Public Health said in a news release on Monday, quote, "The state permits elementary schools to reopen as soon as we reach an adjusted case rate of 25 per 100,000. We are informing Los Angeles County schools tonight via an email letter that will expect to announce that we have reached this threshold effective Tuesday, February 16th. Governor Andrew Cuomo on Monday apologized for stonewalling the release of full and accurate information on COVID-19 deaths of New York nursing home residents. In an afternoon press release, Cuomo conceded better information on nursing home deaths should have come out sooner, and said the failure to provide the data created, quote, a void, unquote, that was filled with what he referred to as misinformation and conspiracy theories. Quote, I take responsibility for creating the void, unquote, the governor said after days in which his administration has been battered for nursing home decisions. Quote, we should have done a better job, unquote. That is laughable. That is a laughable admission. Cuomo and his administration basically cut the numbers to the number of nursing home deaths because they were terrified, scared, embarrassed that they would be ridiculed by Donald Trump and that the Justice Department of Trump may actually have prosecuted or did an investigation into Cuomo's handling of the number of nursing home deaths. While Cuomo was chest thumping while they were putting his names into the running for president. I know we didn't mention that part. If you remember, Cuomo's name was in the running for president of the United States because people were unhappy or unsatisfied with Joe Biden, and they would just float his name as a possible contender. While his name was listed, while he was doing those meetings and speeches, and he was getting out there and giving those the information release, was the information release honest? Meaning, if we know what we know now, that Cuomo was undercounting the number of nursing home deaths to make himself look better than he actually was, and using that as a precipice to attack Trump, as a defense against his own crimes or his own incompetence in the decisions that he was making in New York, and accepting the Emmy. And we have this clip that I don't know if we can even get it up in time, where when all of this is taking place, Cuomo is talking about how he sleeps well at night. Astonishing. By the way, he didn't just give this information. That information had to be ripped from his hands. The general, the prosecutor in New York, basically questioning the number of lives, saying, hey, I think that number is inflated. And then it hitting the news that, oh yeah, that number is inflated. And Cuomo was getting all of that credit, all of that publicity, while simultaneously cooking the books. Astonishing. For him to come out and say, I take information for the void, not necessarily for the lies, not necessarily for the misdirection. I don't take responsibility for that. I just take responsibility for the void. That's amazing. Utterly amazing. And look, they're talking about stripping him of emergency powers and everything else. That's the least you could do. He should be criminally investigated to determine what he knew, when he knew it, and to get an actual counting of the number of deaths. Because I got to be honest, at this point, you shouldn't be able to believe anything that come out of that administration in New York. Be fair. If we were arguing that Donald Trump should be impeached for the number of deaths, for the incompetence, how does that fall to Cuomo in an area where good governance is essential and crucial when you have a president that is that comically inept? I'm making the point that Cuomo was acting as if he was that good governance at a time where he completely was not. That's my point. South Korea spy agency said Tuesday that according to South Korean lawmakers, North Korean hackers tried to break into the computer systems of pharmaceutical giant Pfizer in search for information on a coronavirus vaccine and treatment technology. Give it to them. Give it to them. Why do you have to sneak for that? If people are dying, if there's a virus, if there's something that's affecting all of us as humanity and as human beings, give it to them. I don't care what the government of North Korea is. You can call them comically ridiculous. You can call them whatever they want. Those are human beings. Those are people. Those people clearly are in need of assistance on this front if they're trying to sneak in. The Sputnik V vaccine, for example, give it to them. Or whatever other vaccine. This should be a world effort. And I have no issue with them trying to get information to deal with a crisis in their own public. None. What do you think, Shane? North Korea trying to break in to get the virus cure. Give it to them. What are your thoughts?
100%. The more that has this thing, the better. The more, I mean, yes. Give them what they need to manufacture it themselves, and then ideally, when you have more than enough, or when you even before then, you should start giving it to them too. I mean, from early in the stages of this crisis up to this point, a lack of vaccines has been used as a political cudgel. It's been used as a political tool to damage countries you don't like, which is sickening on a deep level, but it's also self-destructive if you have unrestricted spread in literally zones neighboring your own. Now, granted, there's not much, back and forth on the border between North Korea and South Korea with the whole demilitarized zone and the intense maintenance thereof. But still, you should give people what they need.
Also, there's something more subtle and fundamental here.
In pretty much any case.
If we're considering that country an enemy, what better way of trying to, get close or get ties by saying, hey, here, this is what you need for your public? Meaning, instead of dropping bombs, offering food, offering assistance, offering help, those are things that can create ties between your country and theirs. And regardless of what the government is saying at a certain point, the public will get a different impression, which is what you want. Why don't we drop food instead of dropping bombs? And I would guarantee you that the food will go much longer and trying to get you and kind of these connections with the countries that we're considered to be hostile. We take the completely wrong approach. And I get it from the standpoint of like, we're angry, they're angry, and so you don't want to give it any ground. But what is your ultimate objective? And it seems that the ultimate objective in much of this stuff is just conflict. And I'm saying if you want to get rid of the conflict, bombs is not your way to do it. giving them the things that they need are. And I'm not talking about military support and everything else. I'm just saying you need food here. You need medicine here. You need this particular assistance here. And in the areas to which we can assist you that doesn't involve military and that other stuff, we will do so. Because what we understand is that public of that particular country, even the government, may be approachable through those means. Alienation is not going to do it. So yeah, this is an opportunity. Give it to them. When these opportunities present, take them. And if your goal, if your objective really is peace, those are opportunities and those are ways of getting you closer to that objective. What do you think? I mean, am I being, too naive here? I mean, usually I always say like, Shane, that's not the way to do it. But am I being too Pollyannish? Am I thinking about this? I don't think I am.
I think it would help, but it wouldn't solve the problems. I mean, giving people aid for one thing, because the other government is in some cases they're incentivized to not accept it, either out of distrust, which is warranted in many cases, or because it would make them look weak. And I would say that could hold true with North Korea. But by and large, yes, giving people things they want is better than attacking them for doing things you don't want them to do. Yeah. By and large, just as a moral principle.
Stay with your position. Your position doesn't have to change. Like, meaning, yeah, we don't like you. However, we're going to take... You can even look at it from the standpoint of militaristic or political advantage from doing so. I mean, there's always you can look at it, right? But in my head, it's... Yeah,
you can.
I think we can just get you further along.
But what might make it... Think about it for a moment from the South Korean perspective. There are some people who would go along with this, sure, but there are others who are like, hey, North Korea has ICBMs pointed at us. Why the heck are we wasting our resources to give that to them? Just putting that in as a devil's advocate position, because it's perfectly valid. That's the political dialectic or dynamic, whatever. That's what you have to respond to in these cases.
Well, and they would call them weak.
That's a legitimate response in its own way.
You're weak because you're giving them X, Y, Z. It's the political attack that creates the problem. Like the reality of things, like just from the standpoint of reality, like taking out ideologies and everything else. If South Korea does that, South Korea has already been trying to make ties with North Korea, and we stand in the way of them doing that. Like this was something that they've been trying to do for a while. And giving them food or giving them a vaccine is easily a way of doing that, especially since the ties had already been on some level established. This just makes it better. That's all. I just see it as a benefit. I see it as trying to get the public of the other country to be aware and to know that, look, we are not always at each other's throats. And there is a potential for compromise. And in ways and things that they need it, maybe this is a way to do it. And this kind of hostile disposition, is, that clearly hasn't worked. It clearly hasn't worked.
I agree with you. Yeah, I agree with you.
Let's go to the next one. Peru's foreign minister has stepped down amid a furor over the government officials being vaccinated against the coronavirus even before the country began rolling out doses to healthcare workers. Oh, that's unfortunate. President Francisco Sagasti said they accepted Elizabeth Asti's resignation. An investigation was underway into other senior officials who received early doses of COVID-19 vaccine. Deputy Health Minister Luis Soares Agnio has also resigned over reports that he got vaccinated ahead of healthcare workers. Former President Donald Trump was acquitted by the Senate on Saturday on the charge that he incited an insurrection on January 6th. The impeachment trial ended with 57 senators, including 7 Republicans, finding Trump guilty, well short of the 2/3 majority needed to convict. Over the course of a week of testimony, House impeachment managers laid out the case that Donald Trump was directly responsible for the deadly assault on the U.S. Capitol carried out by a mob of his supporters. Trump's attorneys countered by arguing that this baseless claims of election fraud was protected by the First Amendment and that the Senate lacked the constitutional authority to convict a president who was no longer in office. Several GOP senators cited the latter argument in explaining their decision to acquit. Senate Minority Leader Mitch McConnell said Trump was, quote, practically and morally responsible, unquote, for the violence at the Capitol in a scathing speech following the final vote, but said he voted not guilty because he believed it was unconstitutional to convict a former president. Had the Senate voted to convict Trump, a second vote would have been held to determine whether or not he should be banned from holding public office. We had a really good conversation with Michelle in the last segment on that. And yeah, we mentioned this in the monologue, so you guys can go back and hear that. Those are your headlines. You're listening to Fault Lines with Thomas and Stranahan. We will be back in a moment.
No, James.
Want to talk? Get in touch with us at radio@sputniknews.com.
Shooting from the lip.
We're taking no prisoners here. Real opinions for real people. Where we bring you people with controversial views, and instead of trying to cash them out, we actually let them expand on their views. What's going on in British politics, European politics, and indeed in world politics as well. And wherever you are, whether you're a UKIP supporter, a Tory or Labour, everything is in turmoil.
John Gaunt.
Shooting from the lip.
Fault Lines.
And we're back. You're listening to Fault Lines with Thomas and Stranahan. And I'm going to tell you where you can listen to us. If you guys live in the DC area, you can catch us on the radio there at 105.5 FM and 1390 AM. We are also on in Kansas City at 102.9 FM and 104.7 FM. And if you like what Jamarl and I are putting down, whatever platform you're consuming this content on, you can give up a like, share that video. We are on YouTube. We're on Twitter. We're on different audio options on YouTube. Just do a quick search for Fault Lines Radio. That will bring you to our active channel. Jamarl Thomas's channel is still down. The Progressive Soapbox, that YouTube channel, after YouTube in a ridiculous play. We're talking about this all last week because the week before they demonetized him right at the same time as they demonetized a wave of other YouTubers. Also on the same day, I believe, as the Duran's Twitter account was taken down, was suspended from that platform. Then last week at this point, they undemonetized him. They gave him his monetization abilities back.
And apologized.
Then
we screwed up.
Within a couple of days, they apologized to you, exactly. And then why'd they just go back over this for a second? We've got a caller, but why'd they take your channel down again, Jamarl?
The first time around, there was a mass purge where they were cutting people's ability to earn by taking them out of the payment program. I was apoplectic over this because they basically argued there was harmful content. Okay, harmful content. Show me the harmful content. Oh yeah, we're not going to show it. You just need to remove it. Yeah, remove what? The harmful content. What harmful content? Well, we're not going to show you. You just need to remove it. It's that nonsense. And so they came back and said, our bad. This was an over-enforcement of our policies. And then you ask the very basic question, well, what do you mean over-enforcement? So you mean that you guys made a subjective choice and made a mistake in that subjective choice? Is it possible you're making other subjective choices and making mistakes on those subjective choices also? And if it's indeed a subjective choice, aren't you breaching Section 230 at that point? Because aren't you making a choice? At that point, you're not a platform anymore. You're acting as a publisher. And that was the point. And they backed away. Okay, yeah, fair enough. This was a bad idea. So then the very next week, or almost the very day after they cut it back on, I put up a video that I'm going to run saying that Donald Trump should be impeached. And they take my entire channel off. Now, I put up one unlisted video that nobody saw with the exception of myself. They call that spam. And that video was a reference video to the video that I was going to do that they ripped down. And so they basically said there was spam, deceptive content, etc. in a video that nobody saw, and in a video that was basically, I was attacking the idea of Trump saying that they were lying about impeachment. I showed them all of this. I even explained it to them. I showed them the thread, and they came back and said, Mr. Thomas, in order to do a video like that, you need to show that there's a counter argument to the video. I was like, what are you talking about? The entire video was in a counter argument. Like, are you serious? I was pissed that day. And I came down, I did a video on Rockford. I'm on Rockford. And I was apoplectic, to put it mildly. My wife was like, I heard you yelling all the way upstairs. I was angry. I mean, because basically they're saying, look, we agree with you that 3 + 2 is 4. I mean, 3 + 2 is 5. But the very fact that you asked the question in and of itself is a problem. It's like, are you serious? It's like, so yeah, I was angry. Yeah,
that's ridiculous.
And I gave him
as you should be. I
explained it to him full-throatedly. I made the point that nobody has seen this video that you guys are talking about and calling it spam. The video that I'm using that in is literally a repudiation of the lies that were being put out by Sidney Powell and everything else. That didn't matter. Reality didn't matter. So yeah, it's very aggravating. It's very angering. I don't want to get into it too much here because, at that point, I'm just going to be screaming on camera. Yeah, that's always fun.
You know what? We got a caller. I think we should go to our caller. The YouTube stuff is ridiculous, and we're actually going to be talking about that pretty darn soon. But we have a caller, Ross, calling in from Baltimore. Ross, you're on the line. What's on your mind?
Oh, hi, Shane. Hi, Jamal. I really enjoy your show. I'm going to use what little time I have to advocate 3 quick reforms that I really think progressives should get behind. To some extent, they could quibble with the details. It has to do with congressional reform and the way we elect our officials. This is something you would have seen in the classic progressive era maybe 100 years ago. I think conservatives could get behind it too to a certain extent. The first is I really think we should, and Congress can simply do this if we pressure them into passing this as a law. We need to increase the number of representatives. I know people freak out at the idea of 1,000 people in the House of Representatives or more, but the reality is we need it because the districts are too large, they're too gerrymandered, and they're always going to be this way. In England, France, Canada, New Zealand, all these other countries, which are granted they're smaller, they have 100,000 people approximately in each district. Here, we have almost 800,000. It's an abomination. Second, I would add some proportional representation, not complete proportional representation, but the way they do it in South Korea, Japan, and Russia, which is called parallel voting, which is basically you can either cast 1 vote or 2 votes, but you would be voting for your local representative, and for a small set, maybe 20 to 40% of the Congress would be elected, or less if you want, as sort of an incubator for smaller parties proportionally, and that would allow them some influence without controlling the whole show. And then finally, this is probably the most controversial one. It might spark another civil war because everyone loves to talk about the Senate and get angry. But the Senate being 2 people per state, that's fine. I think the Senate should be limited to judiciary, impeachments, confirmations, things like that, things of high state matters. And the purse should be given over to the House of Representatives. And in exchange for the purse being given to the popular House, gives the small states a few more representatives, proportionally speaking, in the small House. And if we don't do, these are not perfect ideas, but if we don't move in a direction like this, we continue to have 800,000 people in each district. I don't see how we get anything passed. Appreciate your time.
Agreed.
Ross, thank you for the call. Those are interesting, deeper proposals. I want to think about those. I want to look into some of the consequences of implementing those.
Jamal, I do think we should have more people for representation. Like the election college is obscene at this point. Now, I may not agree with the 1 man, 1 vote in the sense of, because we have states and we have a state like California. And to put it in perspective, Hillary Clinton got 3 million more votes out of California. Those 3 million was basically doubled because if I remember correctly, she would have won by 3 million without California. And so when you think about the size of a state like that, the numbers are so huge. And so California would be like, 1 man, 1 vote, because they're basically going to dominate whoever that comes out. So I can totally see why California would want that. But if you get a state like a smaller state who would be like, I don't want to be a part of that. But you do need representation, and that should be representative of the measures of the country itself, not in the way that we have now, where you have like Wyoming with 2 people, and it has as much power as, some other state that has 2 or 3 times its population. So, yeah, I agree. I agree with the premise of it, let's say it that way. In practice, I need to see it, Maram is on. Maram Sousley.
I hear you. We have Maram Sousley. Yes, exactly.
Maram Sousley is geopolitical analyst. Commentator. She's Syria analyst. She comes on all the time, partisan girl. Maram, welcome to the show. Thank you for joining us early.
Hi guys, thanks for having me on. Am I loud and clear?
You are loud and clear. Thank you for being with us. We got a bunch of stuff to talk about with you. Got to talk about Syria. We want to talk about Twitter. And I saw you tweeting about this, about how Twitter lost a significant chunk. I think it was $1.14 billion in 2020. This is after a net profit of, I'm going by memory on this one, but 1.4 something billion profit in 2019. So that's like a $2.5 billion swing from profit to loss over the course of that year from 2019 to 2020. I want to come back to that. First, though, I wanted to talk about the Kurds and Turkey in this segment. So on Sunday, a group of 13 Turkish soldiers were found executed after Turkey's military raided a Kurdistan Workers' Party, that's the PKK compound in northern Iraq. This was Turkish security services' worst loss in a year since last February, when 36 troops were killed in a suspected airstrike in Syria. Turkish President Erdogan's government has responded by saying it would, quote, take necessary steps against individuals and groups glorifying and encouraging terrorism at home and abroad, end quote. So kind of a boilerplate statement there. This comes as Turkey has engaged in operations to eradicate Kurds in Syria and Iraq for years now. We've had conversations with you about the Kurds before. I want to hear your take again. America's State Department released a statement condemning the executions, but suggesting that the PKK's involvement on Sunday, maybe they weren't involved, basically, suggesting that even though the people were found killed there, even though the 13 people were found killed there, maybe the PKK wasn't responsible. Then on Monday, yesterday, American Secretary of State Antony Blinken, in a call with Turkey's foreign minister, both expressed condolences for the killings and blamed the PKK. So you get a change in position from the American government. Biden has yet to hold a call with Turkey's Erdogan on this issue or on any issue. And again, for this conversation, we are joined by Maram Sousli, geopolitical analyst and partisan girl. Check her out on Twitter, twitter.com/partisan girl. Maram, what do you think the consequences of this killing are, sort of in the immediate future? Is this going to mean anything for America's relationship with Turkey? It seems like we have continued to take steps back from the Kurds. Although in that first State Department message statement, we sort of half defended them by saying, we don't know to blame them. But then Antony Blinken did blame them for it. What do you think the signals in America's relationship with Turkey, as well as our relationship with the Kurds, Maram?
Well, first, if you don't mind, I'd like to provide a bit of a background about this situation and point out some of the hypocrisy. The hypocrisy of Turkey, of course, is that while it's saying that it wants to fight terrorism in the region, it has been actively supporting terrorist groups such as Al-Qaeda in the west of Syria in Idlib province and along the Syrian border, which is the north of Syria. So not only that, but Turkey has also been supporting terrorist groups in Libya. So Erdogan's, this whole claim that he's anti-terrorism and he's fighting terrorism, it flies in the face of reality. At the same time, we should note the hypocrisy of the United States, because the PKK is listed as a terrorist organization by the US and by Turkey and by Syria. So the PKK did conduct bombings of civilian targets for many years. And that's why they got that listing of a terrorist organization. Of course, their focus is against Turkey, but also other countries in the region, Iraq, Syria, Iran, not so much, but there is some there. So they have targeted civilians. They do kidnap children and forcibly recruit them to the Kurdish militias, such as the PKK. And the other part of that hypocrisy is, of course, that the PKK is pretty much the same thing as the YPG, because both of those militias take orders from an organization called the PYD, which is the political wing of both the PKK and the YPG. And the PYD, whilst they, people will just call them the Kurds. They don't really want to talk about the nuance of what they are, because it's not just the Kurds. I mean, the Kurds, some of them are very, very religious and they've joined ISIS. Some of them are just nationalists to Syria or to Iraq, and they don't want to get involved in this war. But the PKK, the PYD, is the Kurdistan Workers' Party, and they want to create a socialist state. Yes. Well, in their case, the thing is that there is a slight difference between them and other Kurdish groups that want to create an ethno-state rather than just a communist state. But it's a very slim difference at the end of this day. They both call it Kurdistan. And yeah, of course, I can get into more of it, but now I just want to go to your question. What does this killing mean? What does Biden's policy or change mean? I think Trump definitely wanted to lean closer to Turkey than he did the Kurds. He had obviously some disdain for the Kurds. But Biden has said that he's going to support them more. And I think this killing by the PKK has sort of, the U.S. wanted to keep the Kurds happy, but at that same time, they were they have to acknowledge that the PKK is a terrorist organization, and they have to keep Turkey happy. So it's a precarious position for them. I think this has made it more precarious, and it might actually lead to, acceleration of fighting between the Turks and the Kurds in the region, and that it was obviously not in the interest of the U.S. occupation.
No, and we've got to go into a break. But from the American perspective, on Sunday, the same day as this news came out, dozens of U.S. military vehicles brought assistance to the PKK and the YPG. Yes, well, specifically an offshoot of the YPG, the Syrian Defensive Forces, the SDF, which you talked about before. So on the same day as these executions happened, America brought them armaments, gave military assistance. And then the next day, Blinken expressed his condolences again to Turkey for the PKK's killings of these 13 Turkish soldiers. So it's a weird, within a day, we're sending armaments to the same people that we're sort of de facto condemning for killing the soldiers of our ostensible allies, the largest military presence in NATO, Turkey. It's messy. We need to go into a break, though. For this conversation, we continue to be joined by Maram Susli. She's a political commentator and geopolitical analyst. You're listening to Fault Lines with Thomas and Stranahan. We will be back with Maram on the other side of this break in just a minute.
Fault Lines. We are above all the latest developments, and we don't take any sides. Radio Sputnik, telling the untold.
Want to know how international issues fit into local ones and how local issues fit into international ones with the historical context to tie them together? Well, we're bringing it to you all by any means necessary. Tune in weekdays from 2 to 4 p.m. Eastern Standard Time to hear me, Jackie Lukman, alongside my co-host, Sean Blackman. By any means necessary, your guide to connecting the social, political, and economic movements shaping the world around us.
Fault Lines.
Welcome back to Fault Lines on political. Welcome back to Fault Lines. My name is Jamal Thomas. I'm joined by my co-host Shane Stranahan. But joining us is Maram Susli, political commentator and geopolitical analyst, and she's here to talk about the events that have been taking place in the Middle East, weird events that have been taking place in the Middle East between Turkey and Iraq. Maram, the U.S. has had a very weird relationship in regards to Kurds and in regards to Turkey. In one sense, we've used Kurds as a battering ram to try to take down Assad. In another sense, Turkey considers them terrorists. So an ally of the United States, Turkey, and another ally of the United States, whenever it's convenient, the Kurds, are basically at each other's throats while the U.S. is allies to both of them. This is very weird politics. Turkey, U.S. was using basically Turkish terrorists also as a battering ram to take down Assad. We knew it, and Obama knew it. The media knew it. Do you think any of them opened their mouths about it? Not at all. Listen to this clip for the moment. This is Trump basically pointing out that we were involved in terrorist pursuits to try to take down Assad. This is Trump being at an honest moment. Let's play the clip.
8 long years after President Obama's ill-fated push at regime change, U.S. troops are still on the ground in Syria. More than 500,000 people are dead. Hundreds of thousands are terribly injured, and millions more Syrians are displaced. It really is a nightmare of misery. Across the Middle East, we have seen anguish on a colossal scale. We have spent $8 trillion on wars in the Middle East, never really wanting to win those wars. But after all that money was spent and all those lives lost, the young men and women gravely wounded so many, the Middle East is less safe, less stable, and less secure.
So basically, Trump is making the point of saying, look, Obama was involved in these regime change wars. And he got all of these people killed in these regime change wars. Now, yes, Trump is using that because he's trying, he's not involved in trying to have a war per se, even though he's doing that stuff behind the scenes. But this brought up an issue because this is basically a president that is admitting that the previous president was involved in a regime change war. The thing is, the New York Times had admitted such with $1 billion or more that was spent trying to topple Assad. How does this play into the Turkey issue, where, reports are that Turkey is talking about incursions or they're going into certain Iraqi territory against the Iraqis once. So how does all of this play in? First, did I explain this correctly? And second, how is this escalation between Turkey and Iraq? What is the overall effect of that in that region?
Absolutely. The effect of it is it's going to have repercussions in Syria as well, because obviously the PKK and the YPG are basically the Iraqi faction or Turkish faction versus the Syrian faction of the same political party, which is the PYD. So I don't think Turkey differentiates between them. After all, the only thing that differentiates between them are the acronyms. They're trying to confuse the situation with so many acronyms: SDF, YPG, PKK. It's all the same people at the end of the day. That's the reality of the situation. Turkey sees it that way, so it's going to affect the U.S. occupation in Syria as well, because obviously the Turks have an occupation there themselves, and they're going to try to take out the U.S.'s allies in Syria, which is the YPG. So I guess, why is the U.S. putting itself in such a weird, ridiculous situation? Like, everyone seems to be confused. And that's what I'd like to talk about in terms of realpolitik. Because anyone that tells you it's about, the Kurdish plight or nationalism or even socialism is lying. There's real politic considerations here. The Kurds, of course, in Syria are not even the majority of the ethnicity in the regions of like east of the Euphrates River. They're not even the majority of ethnicity in that area. Raqqa, of course, which they control, is like majority Arab, if you'd like to, an example for that. So this is not about liberating the Kurdish land. This is something that they just feed to the masses. The reality is that, but then again, you might think, well, then why would the U.S. alienate one of its strongest militaries in NATO, its biggest ally, since the world wars? Why would it alienate Turkey? And the answer is it's in Israel's benefit. It's not in the U.S.'s benefit. If the U.S. was going to act in its own benefit, it would ignore the Kurds, it would call them traitors, and it would go fully on board with Turkey's plan to take over the entirety of Syria. But it's not in Israel's interest to keep Syria in one piece. They would like to carve it up, and basically everything east of the Euphrates River, which is, under the Kurdish rule at the moment, has majority of Syria's oil and the majority of Syria's wheat. That's meant to feed 22 million people, as opposed to only the 1.5 billion people that live east of the Euphrates River. And by cleaving that part of Syria off, they aim to maintain Syria in a state of poverty for, till the end of time. And that is in Israel's benefit because they want to keep Syrian territory. They occupy the Syrian Golan Heights. So they want to make sure that Syria remains weak. That is why the U.S. is doing this. It's nothing to do with oil, because as we know, even Trump said it himself, the U.S. is now producing more oil than Syria does by a lot. So it is about Israel. If things were different, it wouldn't be so confusing. It wouldn't look like the U.S. is shooting itself in the foot. That is why they're doing this.
And you brought up the Golan Heights. Massive amounts of oil accessible under the Golan Heights, which again is a large part of why Israel prizes it so much. Trump, of course, signed on to Israel's occupation of that region. I don't see Biden reversing that decision. So at least from the American perspective, it's Israel's at
It's
this
worse
point.
than that, Shane.
And
because they've also taken in, and you can take it
Go
back,
for
but
it.
they're also taking oil from another region. That's where Trump comes out and says, I'm protecting the oil, when he's really basically just stealing the oil. Same thing with the wheat, with the crops. The U.S. had been burning crops at the order of Trump. This is something that came out that Trump administration admitted. Yeah, we are doing that. They basically torching the crops and stealing the oil. And the oil is not enough. Like, it's not these huge oil fields. It's just enough for Syria. Or the wheat is just enough for Syria. And they're basically destroying to push that country into a certain degree of subservience through poverty or through starvation.
Well, that's.
I'm sorry. I just want to interrupt that.
You're talking about stuff that is. No, you're good. You're good. No, that's all valid, and that is all relevant. You're talking about stuff that is Syria's, and that they have already started. So whether you're talking about agriculture or ongoing oil extraction processes, as far as I know, we're still in the early days of Israel and Genie Energy specifically, which is the company with exclusive drilling rights to the oil under the Golan Heights. We're still in the early days of them actually extracting that stuff. It's been a little while since I've checked up on that process, but if it's not going full bore. And again, if you look at Genie Energy's board, a lot of Americans on that board, whether it's Rupert Murdoch or former New Mexican Governor Bill Richardson, a lot of Americans on the board of that company. Anyway, just trying to put some of that into context for folks. I actually want to change topics. We only have so much time, Maram. Thank you again for being with us and for joining us early, too. Let's talk about Twitter for a minute. Like I was saying last segment, Twitter, $1.14 billion net loss in 2020. This is after a $1.4 billion profit in 2019. So a massive swing in profitability over the course of that year. I saw you talking about this on Twitter, on the platform that we're talking about, a little bit ironically. Why do you think this happened? Why do you think they lost so much money so quickly? What policies of theirs or what changes in the climate led to this change, Maram?
It's not just that they're censoring. It's not just that they censored Trump. It's that they censored basically anyone who supported Trump and anyone who is right-leaning conservative. A lot of them are. And I think people start to feel now that they're next on the chopping block. And even left-wing people were censored as well. There was a huge censorship wave where people were suddenly asked to provide evidence of their identity, and their Twitter shut down on accusation that it's a bot, basically. So this is a political move. And Twitter, by doing this, it has put itself in a very precarious position because it blocked Trump while he was president. So its value in the eyes of the world is any president internationally that uses the platform to communicate, even the State Department of any country to communicate, uses Twitter to communicate, now feels that their position is not really secure. That's definitely going to devalue the company. But I found something out that was interesting, that actually for the first 7 years of Twitter's life, it was running at a loss, and now finally it's making a profit. But then again, now it's making a loss. And it's, in my opinion, Twitter should be a public forum, and it should be protected by the First Amendment. Trump was not allowed to block people because people wanted to access politicians. They wanted to talk to politicians. And now not only people are being blocked from this platform, but politicians are being blocked also. And I think that if we really believe in free speech, I mean, other arguments that this is a corporation and it's a company and it makes its own decisions and this is capitalism. Obviously, this isn't capitalism because it's not trying to make a profit. And it isn't just a company that is making its own decisions. It's being influenced by security agencies in the United States and political factions as well. So I think that it really needs to be a public forum.
1,000% agree with you. I mean, because if you think about it, this is our commons. Like, this is the thing to which we discourse. This is the thing to which we argue and debate. This is the platform that politicians put out their points, their plans, their bills. If you look at Twitter probably gives more news than actual news, if that makes sense. Like, anything that breaks is on Twitter. Any conversation is on Twitter. The video ends up on Twitter. Meaning, at a certain point, it becomes a social platform. It becomes our area of discourse. And there's a problem. associated with this notion of being able to just end a person's commentary because you don't particularly like it. Even if the person is not being, hateful, even if the person on some level is being racist, because that is how people are at a certain point. So I agree with you. I have great qualms with them taking this down. What are the effects of this? What do you think the long-term consequences are of this? Do we get into what Shane calls informational nationalism, where countries have their information and they're like fighting and keeping that information preserved on sites like Twitter and Facebook when these guys are saying things that they don't particularly like? What do you think this leads, Maram? And we have just maybe a minute left, you can take the time to answer this question.
Sure. Well, what it leads to is it might be a positive thing, because the internet back in the day was a bunch of separate forums that were not connected. And then we have these major social media companies which focuses all the discourse in one place. But other countries were starting to talk about creating their own Twitter. But more importantly, something is coming up called Panquake, which is a social media on the blockchain that's going to be specifically for freedom of speech. And it's not going to be right-leaning or left-leaning. It's going to be completely independent. So I would encourage your listeners to look up Panquake. I'm proud to be involved.
Well, the other one for that is Rokfin.
Interesting. Hadn't heard of that. Well, yeah, Rokfin is a video platform. There are a bunch of these. And what was the name of that one? Mastodon, I think it was. Another sort of older, different pushes for more open social media platforms historically. I think Mastodon, I believe that predated blockchain, or at least it was set up as again, going on memory at this point, but I don't believe that it was founded on blockchain services. Of course, blockchain, when we're talking about that, most folks think of Bitcoin or Ethereum or these other cryptocurrencies. They're related, but the idea is blockchain sort of serves as a decentralized alternative platform, not just for transactions, but for services and for applications for the development, of apps like social media apps, for instance. But again, in a sort of more decentralized way. We're out of time here. Maram, thank you so much for joining us this morning.
Thank you so much, guys. Glad.
Hey, for those listening, that was Maram Sousley, political commentator and geopolitical analyst. By the way, you can follow Maram on Facebook and Twitter at Partisan Girl, and find her on YouTube by searching for Syrian Girl Partisan. You are listening to Fault Lines with Thomas and Stranahan, and we're taking calls on the other side of this short break. 202-521-1320 is the number. Again, you're listening to Fault Lines. Be right back in just a minute.
Fault Lines.
Feeling kind of blue, but maybe also kind of red, and kind of purple, and kind of alone? You've got a friend on Radio Sputnik. Tune into Political Misfits from 12 to 2 Eastern Time, Monday through Friday, for news, politics, and culture without the two-party bias. Catch us daily on 105.5 in Washington, D.C., or 102.9 or 104.7 in Kansas City. Or find us on Twitter, Facebook, YouTube, Spotify, or wherever you get your news.
Fault Lines.
And we're back. You're listening to Fault Lines with Thomas and Stranahan. And again, this is an open taken call segment, 202-521-1320. Again, that is 202-521-1320. Interesting conversations with Maram. And there's a lot more to talk about there on the Twitter issue, but just in general on social media. We didn't even get to one of the big news events of the weekend, which is Parler is back. The sort of social media alternative platform, free speech alternative to Twitter is how a lot of people have put it. Or if you're more on the establishment side of things, you would say it's a safe haven for the domestic terrorist, white supremacist right wing, kind of whichever side of that coin you want to look at it, whatever. Parler is back up. When I went to check on it, when the news came out, they had a technical difficulties thing up on the front page, basically because they had a whole bunch of people hitting it at once. When I checked this morning, I saw that it is indeed running. Just throwing that in there. I've never had a Parler account, and I'm not sure if I'm ever gonna. But yeah, that app is back up. So this was, of course, for just filling people in case you weren't following this. Parler was taken down in the wake of the events on January 6th after first Apple and Google in their app stores blocked the app, and then Amazon Web Services, which is basically like a cloud hosting company, which had been hosting Parler, they decided to block it too. And that left it down. They very quickly announced that they'd found another host for it. and they are actually back up and running at this point after, I'm guessing, taking time to get it set up in that app. Oh, and in the interval, in the meantime, the head of Parler, one of the dudes who like co-founded it, wrote the code, etc., was pushed out, apparently at the behest of Rebecca Mercer, the daughter of Robert Mercer. And both of those, the Mercer family, known as sort of prominent funders of the alt-right, they pushed him out because apparently he was trying to modify Parler's free speech platform to make it more amenable to what Google, Apple, and Amazon would have been accepting, and they didn't like that, so they pushed him out. Anyway, just filling people in on the details there. That is back up. But I would say Parler, as well as other apps, trying to build themselves as free speech platforms, that was definitely a serious warning, and not just a warning. But for Parler, it was more than that. For anybody else who's looking to develop their own apps, that was a huge warning that if you try to tread here, if you go too far in the direction of free speech, what many in the establishment are calling dangerous speech, then we will take you down. I don't know how else to say it. Jamal, any quick thoughts on that?
I mean, they always say, hey, you guys should go and build your own application if you don't necessarily like what's being said. And liberals will say this all the time. Hey, build your own. That's what conservatives believe in, right? And they would say it's a private company, and as a private company, liberals, by the way, it's a private company, and that private company can make decisions on who it wants to put and who it doesn't want to put, because it's its company, it's its choice. And then you take that to the NFL, and you say, well, isn't the NFL a private company? And if Colin Kaepernick wants to take a knee, isn't that the same argument that it's under their auspices that they can get rid of him because they don't necessarily want him taking the knee in their company if it's going to undermine their profitability? But they take a different tact between the two. Like they would say Kaepernick should be able to do that. A team should pick up Kaepernick. But then they would come to Twitter or YouTube when it's somebody who they don't like what they're saying and say, but they should be able to get rid of him. Liberals will make that argument. They make that argument for free speech all the time. I mean, liberals are the ones who are screaming that you should be taking conservative voices off platforms, right? Like, are there liberal voices that they are screaming that should be taken off platforms?
Of course, that's who's screaming it. That is where it's coming from. If you look at
the liberals, they're also screaming that the NFL is wrong for getting rid of Colin Kaepernick, right?
Yeah, well, but it's not. I'll be honest. I've heard them say that. Okay, well, the NFL. I guess I get where you're going with this, but it all comes down to.
Like, I think Kaepernick should be able to make his point, but who's fighting for Kaepernick? It's libs. It's liberals. They've taken up that mantle.
I hear what you're saying. And what you're doing is you're pointing out the hypocrisy of the argument that they're using. But I'll be honest, I see that argument as a distraction. And admittedly, that's the point of hypocrisy, is that on whatever point you're being hypocritical, it's good to point out that you're being hypocritical, but in some sense, there's actually a deeper reason for why you're being hypocritical that the argument is sort of distracting from. And I would say the same thing is true here. Why are they supporting Kaepernick while they're opposing people being able to say whatever nasty or true or untrue stuff on Twitter and other platforms? It's because of what they're saying.
That's my point.
That's what justifies the hypocrisy.
It's like you bring the hypocrisy up first, and then you hit them for it. I don't think it's a distraction at all. It gets at to the core of why they're being deceptive. And so, and not to mention, it presents that as a question of like, you guys need to answer this. Why is one okay but the other is not? And let them answer it. I think that's a valuable tool. I'm pointing those things out. But go ahead. I'm sorry.
A little bit racist. It's a little bit racist to even ask the question tomorrow.
We're right. That's as an African American, I can pull that question. A white person has a hard time making an argument, right? But it is true, though. I mean, it's a fair argument to make. It's like, well, wait a minute. Why are you okay with Kaepernick? That's basically what the NFL did. But you guys are, you put him on Nikes. You guys were screaming to the hilt that a team should hire him. But on this very specific case, you're perfectly willing to make the different argument, an opposite argument. Why? And go from there. I honestly think pointing out hypocrisy is important for the very reason that you stated. There's usually a deeper reason for the hypocrisy. What's at the core of that? And
I hear you. Yeah, no, I agree. And okay, another way of looking at this, I admit the Constitution, the idea of the Constitution is frayed. The idea that there are like deeper legally binding somewhat more objectively true principles upon which a country can be founded or people can organize their societies, et cetera, all that stuff. That idea has sort of lost its weight. It's lost its currency over the course of a couple of centuries, whether that's due to revisionism or whether the Constitution by its nature is inherently revisionistic. You need to reinterpret it, and in the process, you revise it. I get there are different sides of that argument, but nevertheless, one of the principal bedrocks, sort of fitting within that frame, one of the principal bedrocks of our country as a ostensibly liberal democratic country is that you should be able to freely speak, to freely debate, whatever topics come to light, whatever topics come up really. And short of threatening people, even arguably, although this is arguable, short of yelling fire in a crowded theater, that kind of thing, short of that, you should be able to talk about pretty much whatever you want to. And for a while now, and this is, I get people why they're pushing for the making Twitter and other social media companies a public utility effectively, making it a licensed platform, basically run by the government, run under the free speech protections that you would expect from a platform like that. I get why people make that argument, but I keep coming back to this. Wouldn't that give more power to the government to restrict free speech? Wouldn't that in the process, here's the thing, with the Constitution so frayed, with liberals and I would argue soon others arguing for the suppression of free speech because it's seen as dangerous and misinforming or whatever, wouldn't that extend through the government action to the Constitution and the Bill of Rights itself? Wouldn't that in some sense serve to erode? In other words, if the Constitution is weak, what's to stop us from weakening it further cataclysmically by eroding the First Amendment, by eroding freedom of speech? Do you see where I'm going with this, Jamal? I'm worried that will come as a result of making these companies public platforms, public utilities. What's your take?
But we see what has happened. Even if you can't see the sliding door, we are in physical matter reality right now with the actions that are taking place where these guys are limiting and silencing speech and are doing what they can to basically cut off speech they don't like. At the very least, in the government aspect, you have a say. You have no say in private enterprise. That's a wall that has been, these guys are standing between it, and they can cut off the president of the United States if they want to. I'm saying that with the government, you get a vote.
But what about blockchain as an alternative? What about, because that is a genuine alternative. Up to this point, we haven't assumed that there is any alternative other than keeping these in the hands of private companies who are operating on publicly hosted services and are inherently susceptible to pressures from the government.
The laws
it's either
can still
that,
be passed
or you make these platforms public.
I mean, that's not a defense. Laws can still be passed going after those guys. I mean, I guess my thing is having a say-so, even if it's diminutive, even if it's been lowered, is better than not. And we have no say-so over private companies when they make this. Like, Section 230 is such a flimsy attack piece. You know what I mean? And honestly, it being a private prank.
But do we have any say-so over our government?
Yes.
Do we have any real ability to steer the levers of power?
Whether it's used or not is one thing, but that power is there, and it's a power that is not there for private enterprise. Look, I get where you're coming from, so I'm not undermining the argument. I get where you're coming from. I guess my thought is, you have a say-so in one. You have zero say-so in the other. I'll take the one where I have say-so and push to try to get those things changed and be under the auspices of free speech. Because otherwise, I don't know what else to use.
I don't know about that. We got to call it. I hear what you're saying. That's a longer conversation. We got to call it. We got Brave calling in from Atlanta. Brave, you're on the line. What's going on?
Hey, what's going on, guys? Just to chime in real quick on your point you were making. I do believe that we have say-so as far as the government, and but I also think that we have say-so as far as private companies, but it's more so a matter of us, as they say, voting with our dollar. You know what I'm saying? So in this case, it would be a matter of voting with our interests, I guess, whether we take part or whether we, boycott that particular platform or not. I think the better choice is to push that we break down some of these monopolies. Force our representatives to do their job, right, and pass laws to break down the monopolies, giving room and space for other platforms to open up, because that's the real issue. It's like the same thing we're dealing with with this full two-party system that we have, because we don't really have a two-party system. It's these two different corporations have worked together to take a monopoly, put a monopoly in place over our political system. Right.
Well, but here's the thing then, man. I mean, we're dealing with, okay, so whether you're talking about business or government, you're dealing with monopolies. One, coming back to the tactic that Jamal was advocating, whether you're dealing with business or government, the tactic is the same. You boycott. So what's the damn difference? Again, you're dealing with the same type of entity. They're so completely fused at this point with this reciprocal back and forth between the interests of big tech companies and the interests of our government. They influence each other endlessly to the point where they're Siamese twins and you can't separate them. And the tactic for trying to repair their problems is the same, as far as I can tell. We need to go into a break. Brave, thank you for the call. Any quick comeback on that, Jamal?
Yeah, a vote is different than just a push. Vote is direct, intrinsic interaction, as opposed to being on the outskirts of a corporation, just beseeching them. There's a difference in those things, even if you consider it a small difference.
Well, but what about withholding your vote? But what about withholding your vote? That's the thing, because that's crucially what you were representing. What about withholding your vote? It's the same thing.
But you have political will involved in trying to change something that is a governmental structure that is just not there for a corporation. We have to go to a break, but that's my.
If you have a bunch of people choosing to stand, we gotta come back on this. We gotta come back to this some other time. You guys are listening to Fault Lines with Thomas and Stranahan. We'll be back in a minute with headlines in our last hour of this show.
Listening to Radio Sputnik. Telling the untold.
Fault Lines.
Live from across the divided states of America, it is time now for the last hour this morning of the most disruptive show covering news, politics, events, and more across our country as well as across our globe. In the independent corner, I am your political analyst, Shane Stranahan.
In the left corner, I'm the indefatigable, the ever vigilant, the last man on the wall, your political analyst, Jamal Thomas.
And together we are Fault Lines with Thomas and Stranahan. All right, we got headlines. Let's get into them. First up in COVID news, at least 994 new coronavirus deaths and 55,457 new cases of COVID were reported in the United States yesterday, February 15th. Again, I'm going to point this out. That's less than 1,000 deaths, and that's less than 60,000 new cases. If we had some sort of magical time portal from last year to this one, where it was like June, or maybe a bit earlier, maybe April, May, something like that. And we were, rubbing our hands and a portal opened up and suddenly we were looking in on today, listening to this headline. Those would seem pretty high. 994 new deaths in a day and 55,457 new cases. Back in the day, we would have been like, wow, things are still pretty bad. Things have gotten worse. This isn't good. However, from my perspective, it's a lot better than it was last week. And so everything is relatively rosy. Again, last week we saw for the first time 4 sequential days, 4 days in a row of less than 100,000 new cases per day. Deaths were still pretty high, but again, 994 new deaths is a lot lower than the 3,000 or 4,000 that we were seeing pretty consistently there for a while. So, only a fraction of a 9/11, only like 1/3. I think it's around 1/3 of the people who died on 9/11, the equivalent of that over the weekend, yesterday at least. But again, quick note of warning. Usually on the first day of a new week, you have lower numbers than other days. And the assumption here is that it simply takes time for people to collate the data. People have time off. And so they're still, rounding stuff up. They're still bringing in all the different points of data. Anyway, over the past week, there have been an average of 85,798 cases per day. That's a decrease of 41% from the average 2 weeks earlier. And as of this morning, more than 27,738,000 people in the U.S. have been infected with the coronavirus, and over 486,000 have died from it. Continuing COVID news, in Los Angeles County, elementary schools will be allowed to reopen for in-person learning starting today. This is after county health officials announced they expected to reach the state's COVID-19 case threshold for reopening those campuses. The LA County Department of Public Health said in a news release on Monday that the state permits elementary schools to reopen as soon as we reach an adjusted case rate of 25 per 100,000. We are informing LA County schools tonight via an emailed letter that we expect to announce we have reached this threshold effective Tuesday, February 16th. Again, That's today. In New York, Governor Andrew M. Cuomo on Monday almost apologized for stonewalling the release of full and accurate information on the COVID-19 deaths of New York's nursing home residents. In an afternoon press conference, Cuomo conceded that better information on nursing home deaths should have come sooner and said the failure to provide the data created a void that was filled with what he referred to as misinformation and conspiracy theories. I take responsibility for creating the void. That's a quote, the governor said, after days in which his administration has been battered for its nursing home decisions. Quote, we should have done a better job, end quote. By the way, again, what he's apologizing for is delaying the release of that until basically, he didn't even do it. New York's, eventually he did, eventually his administration did, but New York's Attorney General Letitia James did that first a couple of weeks ago, like 3 weeks ago now at this point. She did that first. Then a couple of weeks later, his government responded by releasing that data, but he's not even apologizing for the deaths themselves. He's not apologizing for his administration's handling of the crisis. I'm just going to point this out. He's apologizing for not disclosing it sooner, which is not even really the thing for which he should be apologizing. Maybe it's second or third down on the list. But number one is your administration bungled this, you screwed this up, and a lot of extra people died while you were sleeping softly on your pillow, in your own words, saying that you'd save so many lives. Anyway, we talked about this earlier with Michelle Witte. I'm not going to belabor the point because we have a lot more headlines to get to, but go back and check out that segment. I was at 7:30 a.m. Eastern with host of Political Misfits, co-host Michelle Witte. South Korea's spy agency said Tuesday that according to a South Korean lawmaker, North Korean hackers tried to break into the computer systems of pharmaceutical giant Pfizer in a search for information on a coronavirus vaccine and treatment technology. In Peru, the country's foreign minister has stepped down amid a furor over government officials being vaccinated against the coronavirus even before the country began rolling out doses to healthcare workers. President Francisco Sagasti said that he had accepted Elizabeth Estede's resignation, and an investigation was underway into other senior public officials who had received early doses of the COVID-19 vaccine. Deputy Health Minister Luis Suarez Ognio has also resigned over reports that he got vaccinated ahead of healthcare workers. In national political news, former President Donald Trump was acquitted by the Senate on Saturday of the charge that he incited the insurrection on January 6th. The impeachment trial ended with 57 senators, including 7 Republicans, finding Trump guilty. That's still well short of the two-thirds majority needed to convict. Over the course of a week of testimony, House impeachment managers laid out the case that Trump was directly responsible for the deadly assault on the U.S. Capitol carried out by a mob of his supporters. Trump's attorneys countered by arguing that his baseless claims of election fraud were protected by the First Amendment and that the Senate lacked the constitutional authority to convict a president who was no longer in office. Several GOP senators cited the latter argument in explaining their decision to acquit, specifically Senate Minority Leader Mitch McConnell, who said that Trump was practically and morally responsible for the violence at the Capitol in a scathing speech, but said that he voted not guilty because he believed it would be unconstitutional to convict a former president. Had the Senate voted to convict Trump, a second vote could have been held to determine whether he should be banned from holding future public office. At least 6 deaths have been linked to a dangerous winter storm system that's endangering lives and breaking records across the United States. Millions of businesses and homes in Texas are without power and heat as the electric system struggles to meet the demand. City officials in Abilene, Texas announced Monday night that all city water services had been shut off due to the historic winter storm and cold. In international news, President Biden's vow to expand U.S. engagement with allies will be put to the test later this week when he participates in a virtual meeting with leaders of the world's wealthiest democracies and then delivers remarks to the annual Munich Security Conference. Administration officials say the online gathering Friday of the leaders of the G7, that's the U.S., the UK, France, Germany, Italy, Canada, and Japan, will focus mainly on global COVID-19 responses and the world economy, with Mr. Biden planning also to press for ways the group can better work together in dealing with China. Myanmar's deposed leader Aung San Suu Kyi was hit with a second charge on Tuesday, this time of violating the country's disaster management laws. This is after the coup a couple of weeks ago. In the wake of that coup, their first charge against the military government's first charge against Suu Kyi related to the importation of walkie-talkies. This second charge has also been leveled against the country's former president, Win Myint. Their lawyer, by the way, has not yet made contact with either Suu Kyi, the state secretary, or the former president, although Suu Kyi is expected to appear in court by video link this Wednesday. In the Democratic Republic of the Congo, at least 60 people have drowned after a boat capsized. Some 300 people have been rescued, but as many as 200 others are unaccounted for following the accident on the Congo River. Locals said the boat hit a rock east of the capital, Kinshasa, while traveling at night, which is prohibited. Many people use boats to travel long distances in the Democratic Republic of the Congo because of its poor road network. The European Court of Human Rights has rejected a complaint against German authorities' refusal to prosecute an officer who ordered the deadly bombing in 2009 of 2 fuel tankers in northern Afghanistan. Scores of people died when U.S. Air Force jets bombed the tankers hijacked by the Taliban near Kunduz. The strike was ordered by the commander of the German base in Kunduz, George Klein, who feared insurgents could use the trucks to carry out attacks. Iran State TV reported on Tuesday that Iranian and Russian militaries have kicked off a joint naval drill in the Indian Ocean aimed at boosting security of maritime trade in the region. Apparently, units from Iran's Navy and the powerful Revolutionary Guards Navy will take part in the exercise dubbed, quote, Iran-Russia Maritime Security Belt 2021, end quote, in the northern part of the Indian Ocean, spanning a stretch of about 17,000 kilometers. That's 10,600 miles. In tech news, one quick headline here, Parler is back. The social media platform, which presents itself as a free speech alternative to social media platforms like Twitter, is back in service this weekend. This is after it was taken from the Google and Apple Play stores, their app stores, shortly following the events of January 6th. I believe it was January 8th, 9th, they were taken down. Then the following Sunday, I believe this would have been January 10th, they were taken off of Amazon Web Services, Amazon's cloud hosting division, taken off of those, and that just put the site out of running completely. If you wanted to access it with your computer, with a web browser at that point, you couldn't. It was no longer functional. They made plans very quickly to make a comeback. They have found other web hosters, another hoster for their web services, and they're now back in action, apparently. In Earth and Science news, the U.S.'s top infectious diseases expert Anthony Fauci has been awarded a $1 million Israeli prize for his commitment to science. Dr. Fauci, who was often at odds with former President Trump over how to handle the pandemic, was given the Dan David Prize for defending science, quote unquote. He was also praised for advocating for COVID vaccines and for his leadership on HIV research and AIDS relief. Dr. Fauci, 80 years old, has advised 7 U.S. presidents. Here's another take on Fauci. I think we've said before, he seems to be like a good career bureaucrat. And I just mean good in the technical sense that he's good at being a career bureaucrat. Whether you like the guy or not, he does seem to know how to do the job that he's supposed to do, which at the very least is to run a bureaucracy and to maintain political stability for himself. This is as he was going basically toe-to-toe with Trump in sort of weird, half-responsive, I don't even remember exactly how all this stuff went down. I just remember last summer, there were a bunch of back and forths between President Trump and Anthony Fauci, which polarized all the people who hated Trump against Trump even further, and all the people who supported Trump against this sort of hitherto unknown public health figure, Anthony Fauci, that made him one of the leaders of this crusade. Of course, he was also heading up the White House's coronavirus task force. And so this was both an example of infighting of Trump hitting his own and a sort of useful rallying point early on in the course of the pandemic for saying, okay, this is how you should be doing it. This is how you shouldn't. Here's who's at fault, all that stuff. Anyway, he won this prize. Staff at the Australian National University in Canberra, Australia, have been encouraged to ditch the terms mother and father with the hope of being more gender inclusive. ANU's gender inclusivity or gender inclusive handbook has requested fathers to be referred to as the non-birthing parent and the term mother replaced with gestational parent, quote unquote, when discussing childbirth. The handbook stated that, quote, while many students will identify as mothers or fathers, using these terms alone to describe parenthood excludes those who do not identify with gender binaries.
That's ridiculous.
I chuckled.
That goes too far. If I have a kid, I'm the parent. I don't need you to say I didn't. No, I was with her the entire time.
You're
I'm
the father, right?
The kid knows
that
I'm there. The kid knows my energy and all that stuff. And when that kid is born, it's our kid. Screw that. No, I'm not going with this notion of prioritizing my input, or for that matter, my association with the family because I didn't necessarily carry the child. I am against that entirely.
I mean, this deserves its own segment, but this whole thing is so messy. And I think it's silly that they're trying to do that. They're only going to incur more pushback against them, and they will respond to that pushback as if that pushback were sexist or transphobic or something like that. But it's just plain, most people, if you have kids, you know, by and large, you're going to view yourself as a mother or a father, and being told to identify not as a mother or a father, but as a parent, or having it be suggested that you shouldn't identify, it'll strike you as ridiculous. And so without even talking about the facts, which we could and should, this is a bad move. Anyway, more to talk about. Archaeologists working in Egypt have uncovered, quote, what is believed to be the oldest high-production brewery in the world, end quote. The Egyptian Ministry of Antiquities said Saturday, east of the temple of King Narmer in Abydos, the 5,000-year-old site was relocated in 2018 using magnetic survey by archaeologists from a joint Egyptian-American mission. This is after it had been previously partially discovered and then lost again by British archaeologists in the early 20th century. I wonder what they produced, and I wonder what it tasted like. I would like to know. Anyway, in business news, Toni Breidinger made history as the first Arab-American female driver to compete in a NASCAR National Series. This after she made her debut at Daytona International Speedway over the weekend. The 21-year-old on Monday told CBS News it was exciting to be a trailblazer. And Nigeria's Ngozi Okonjo-Iweala was appointed Monday to head the World Trade Organization, becoming the first woman and first African to take on the role amid disagreement over how the body decides cases involving billions in sales and thousands of jobs. Okonjo-Iweala, 66 years old, was named Director General by representatives of the 164 countries that make up the WTO, which deals with the rules of trade between nations. And with that, those are our headlines. You're listening to Fault Lines with Thomas and Stranahan. We're going into a break, and we will be back with our next guest in just a moment. Be right back.
Fault Lines. 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. We give you the most essential information out there. Radio Sputnik, telling the untold.
What's the most important hour of the day? It's the Critical Hour with Dr. Wilmer Leon. On this show, we don't just deliver the latest headlines. We divide the real from the fake. Tune in to hear from some of the most brilliant political minds of today. Get in-depth news and analysis that goes beyond the surface and dig straight into the details. Set your clock to the Critical Hour for a news perspective unlike any of those other guys. Tune in to the Critical Hour with Dr. Wilmer Leon, weekdays 6 to 7 p.m. Eastern, and catch us on Facebook Live. You're listening to Radio Sputnik.
Fault Lines.
Welcome back to Fault Lines on Radio Sputnik. My name is Jamal Thomas. I'm joined by my co-host Shane Stranahan, coming to you live out of our station in Washington, D.C. If you guys live in the area, you can catch us on radio at 105.5 FM and 1390 AM. We're also in Kansas City at 102.9 FM and 104.7 FM. If you guys are digging what Shane and I are putting down, whatever platform you're consuming this content on, give us a like and share that audio or video. You can also reach us with a tweet, a chat, and of course, by phone, 202-521-1320. That is 202-521-1320. Your engagement helps make this show what it is, so definitely don't be shy. Look, on this show, we've gotten into a very good conversation, full-throated, over the course of the last week about impeachment. I am the person who's been making the argument that Trump should be completely, 1,000% impeached. And the argument against it is shallow and small at best. And my feelings haven't changed with what took place over the weekend. In fact, they've been emboldened. What took place over the weekend was basically an acquittal. But it's an acquittal that comes with the damning indictment by Mitch McConnell himself and the information that makes it very clear that Donald Trump knew that Pence was in danger, knew that Republicans were in danger, were in communication with those Republicans as the putsch attempt was taking place, and he still didn't respond to call off his mob. Joining us to have this conversation is Joel Siegel, former congressional staffer, co-author of H.R. 676, the Expanded and Improved Medicare for All bill, one of the leading architects for the passage of the Affordable Care Act. He is co-founder and National Director of the Justice Action Mobilization Network, JAMN, and nationwide multiracial climate action network. Joel, you were the first person that came to mind when all of this stuff was unfolding. So thank you for joining us. Welcome to the show, man.
Hey, good morning. How are you
doing
today?
Okay. With the exception that Donald Trump should have been impeached, at least my standpoint. Let's play the clip for the moment. I want you to hear McConnell, because McConnell makes the case just as good as I did, makes it maybe even better than most, and yet still comes with this loophole, this nonsense that Donald Trump isn't president anymore, so he's not guilty of impeachment, and they don't have the authority to do it. Nonsense. Let's play the clip.
Former President Trump's actions preceded the riot were a disgraceful dereliction of duty. There's no question, none, that President Trump is practically and morally responsible for provoking the events of the day. No question about it. The people who stormed this building believed they were acting on the wishes and instructions of their president. And having that belief was a foreseeable consequence of the growing crescendo of false statements, conspiracy theories, and reckless hyperbole, which the defeated president kept shouting into the largest megaphone on planet Earth. These criminals were carrying his banners, hanging his flags, and screaming their loyalty to him.
Very clear.
It's
very straightforward. McConnell makes the point. McConnell makes that argument. And a disgraceful dereliction of duty, politically and practically and morally responsible. No question about it. A foreseeable consequence of the president screaming into the microphone. And yet, McConnell comes at the very end and says, not guilty because we don't have the authority in the Senate to do it. When you heard that, what did you think of, Joe? What was the first thing that came to your mind?
First of all, I'm honored to be on the show. The first thing that came to my mind was that the senators who really probably believe there should be impeachment are so fearful of the Trump base that they, and including McConnell, right, in Kentucky, that McConnell made a decision. His decision was, if as a loyal Republican that's now been, our party's been taken over by the Trump wing of the party, we can't alienate them. If we do, we risk being voted out of office. We risk not being able to raise money. But what it's emblematic of is a much deeper problem, and that's the shift towards more authoritarian policies, towards nativism, towards the use of violence, that everybody in this country, doesn't matter what party, what your ideology is, this is what I'm working on through Jammin right now, and that's, the authoritarianism and the use of violence is what we're looking at. There's millions of people who adhere to this philosophy, and Trumpism is growing. People are scared of Trump. There's a huge Trump base, and there's going to have to be some kind of a bipartisan discussion about what do we do with this Trump movement, and because it's so dangerous that I did not think that I would see it in my lifetime. As a Jewish person, I feared it would happen. I just didn't think it would happen in my lifetime. But back in my mind, I always feared that it would be a resurgence of a right-wing movement. And McConnell, he wanted it both ways, right? He wanted to come out and say, hey, look, I'm against a coup d'etat. At the same time, I'm not going to vote for impeachment. And then he's saying, there should be criminal trial. So this Trump base is huge. It's growing. And they're scared. The Republicans are scared of the Trump base.
So, Joel, what do you think we should do about it?
Well, I'll tell you what I'm doing about it. There will be a series of seminars at George Mason University and at Yale, and they're going to be done at use across the country. But we're going to begin getting, I think, some great thought leaders and community leaders to begin having a discussion. What are we going to do about it? And I'll offer 3 suggestions. Number one, we have to have a discussion with Trump voters and ask them, what is it about this man that attracts you to him? What are you feeling? I do think that there's a correlation. Throughout history, whenever you see a strong man or a strong woman, usually been a strong man, the rise of Pinochet, for example, in Chile, the assassination of Allende, one of my favorite political leaders, Mussolini, I can go on and on and on. Authoritarianism usually happens when people are very fearful of the economy. I think a lot of the Trump voters, especially in the rural areas in the Rust Belt, are very disaffected. They don't know where their next paycheck is going to come from. A lot of their businesses that they used to work in could have been, the tire factory went to Mexico or China. And they really did view Trump as the person who was going to make America great again. And because they're not that sophisticated, in my opinion, in terms of they're not going to read books by Michael Cohen or read New York Times articles, they still think that he really, believes in them. The Democratic Party, especially, is going to have to show the American people and the Republican Party, by the way, the moderate wing, is that they care about their well-being. It's kitchen table issues, man. Childcare, healthcare, job security, right? Food, getting through COVID. I think that's what we have to do about it. But it all starts from having a national discussion about the salient question. What are we going to do about it? And that's what we're going to start in just a few weeks. You'll see these symposiums. We're going to do them every month. So it'll be on election protection, gerrymandering, but the rise of the far right. And this is nonpartisan, man,
That sounds good. That sounds a lot better than what I was expecting from I'll admit, I was sitting here waiting to pounce. This is as just on Friday last week, we were talking about the Biden administration planning to expend grants for the Department of Homeland Security to engage in what it calls attitudinal inoculation, taking sort of medical perspective on this stuff, but basically talking about trying to convince people in advance. Now, this is admittedly, they're talking about domestic terrorism. There are very few people who would sign on to anything you'd call domestic terrorism, but I think a lot of people are worried about that term, domestic terrorist, being extended and in the process abused and diluted, which is maybe the most dangerous part, but extended inevitably to a lot of people who are, while they may be domestic, they're not terrorists. So I'm worried about that stuff. And based on a couple of things you'd said in the past, I was kind of worried you'd be pushing that too. But from what you were saying there, that's completely reasonable. I think that you're right. And I think that it was for a long time, and this has of course been its own big narrative. It was very easy to dismiss people who voted for Trump as voting for him because of racist resentment or, because of lingering prejudices. And while there may be flavors of that, I would argue that what's at hand, what's really there is what Trump was appealing to was bringing America back from when a lot of people felt like, okay, we had some job security at some point, whether you're a part of a union or not. You're living in a more or less functional, smaller society. And at this point, opioid epidemic, loss of jobs, now the pandemic, follow on from the 2008-2009 financial crisis with no real deeper solution for a deep chasm that a lot of people were left in economically, and the sense that nobody frankly ever did anything about it other than hand billionaires more billions, that kind of thing. Those are real problems. So it is kitchen table issues like you're talking about. That's good. That's good to hear. And I was sitting here ready to pounce.
I think the issue that we have to deal with now is unity. Unity. It's a great word, by the way, unity. And, we've gotten into this like Dallas Cowboys versus the Washington Redskins kind of a rivalry, right? Or, Wilt Chamberlain, versus the Boston Celtics. But we're going to have to develop as a nation a moral consensus. Do we want to follow the Constitution, yes or no? Okay, that's number one. Number two, do we want upward mobility and equality for everybody? Yes or no? Do we want, does everyone need to be treated fairly who comes here from another country that's an immigrant that wants a better life or fled, rape or drug activity or gangs? yes or no? And I think that, you know, when I walk around, and I'm in Charlotte, North Carolina, I don't live in D.C. anymore. You know, when I go to a mall or I go out to a restaurant, I just don't think the majority of those people are racist. I do think are there Trump voters that are nativists? Yes. Are there domestic terrorists in America? Absolutely. Do I think that domestic terrorism must be banned? Doesn't matter who they are, whether you're Al-Qaeda, whether you're, you know, ISIS, whether you're an organization that's paramilitary, that preaches violence. I do think they should be banned, all right? But more importantly, we got to have a conversation. Democracy versus authoritarianism. Democracy versus gerrymandering. Democracy versus voter suppression. What the right-wing Republican Party has done for decades, especially with gerrymandering, it's about race. If you look at voter suppression, it's about race. That should not be partisan. H.R. 1 and H.R. 4 should be passed by Republicans and Democrats alike. Unfortunately, the Republican Party has drifted so far to the right. They basically are saying, if I'm going to win office, the only way I can win as a white guy is to purge the voting rolls in Georgia. That happened. Is to close down early voting in the black community. That's happening. There's over 100 bills right now in general assemblies across the country to disenfranchise, you know, black students and poor folk. Now, is that Republican or Democrat? It's neither. It's just wrong. It's immoral. It's racist. It's un-American. And that's where we're at. We got to have a national conversation about what's, you know, the soul of America. And we got to get out of this rivalry between Republican and Democrat. That's not what it's about. It's about the Constitution, democracy, and fairness.
Well, I mean, that getting out of, I don't think you're ever going to get out of some sense of rivalry because, again, there are rivalrous organizations. They're competing with each other for money and power and office. Last, but hopefully not least, I'm curious what you mean by banning. I mean, if you're talking about literally people who are advocating for violence, I think there are many fewer people who would argue against banning those than there are who would argue against banning people just based on whatever their beliefs are. But I don't know exactly what you mean. Maybe we can come back to that. Regardless, we got to go into a break. We are joined now by Joel Siegel. He's a former congressional staffer, co-author of H.R. 676. That's the expanded and improved Medicare for All bill. He's also one of the leading architects for passage of the Affordable Care Act, also known as Obamacare, and he is co-founder and national director of the Justice Action Mobilization Network. That's JAM, the JAM that he was referring to. It's a nationwide multiracial climate action network. You're listening to Fault Lines with Thomas and Stranahan. We'll be back with Joel on the other side of this break in one short minute.
Fault lines. Tough questions are the most powerful weapon we have. As long as you have questions, we'll keep asking. Radio Sputnik. Telling the untold.
Epidemics and pandemics could kill millions of people, and they actually did. Centuries ago, deadly outbreaks called the Black Death, the Plague of Justinian, and the Spanish flu ravaged countries, empires, and whole continents. Some of these diseases are still present around the globe. Others have become a thing of the past. Discover how these ancient and not-so-distant outbreaks from previous centuries differ from modern-day SARS, MERS, and coronavirus pandemics. Listen to our new series, Outbreak, the deadliest epidemics in human history, this week on Radio Sputnik.
Fault Lines.
Welcome back to Fault Lines on Radio Sputnik. My name is Jamal Thomas. I'm joined by my co-host Shane Stranahan, coming to you live out of our station in Washington, D.C. We've been having a really good conversation with Joel Siegel, former congressional staffer, co-author of H.R. 676, the expanded and improved Medicare for All bill, and one of the leading architects for passage of the Affordable Care Act, Obamacare. He is co-founder and national director of Justice Action Mobilization Network, a nationwide multiracial climate action network. And again, Joel, thank you for joining us.
Yeah, great discussion. We're talking about safeguarding democracy. I think as a Jewish person who lost half of my family in the Holocaust, one half. I grew up watching movies of the Holocaust, right? And, I grew up in the South where there was a tremendous amount of anti-Semitism and racism. So I come at this in terms of banning domestic terrorism in maybe in a different
understand.
way.
I mean, it's funny when you said that. We were going to hit on that particular topic, and we want to go back to that, and we're going to get Biden. I would say this though, as you were saying, the thing I was thinking about was, I think most people would agree with you in regards to the higher ideals. Let's make sure people get their health care. Let's deal with the kitchen table issues. Let's make sure people have jobs. Make sure people have health care. The basic requirements of life. And if you deal with the basic requirements of life, you get rid of a lot of this hysteria, a lot of this anger that it seems to be bubbling. I think the problem is, when you look at it, there is no faculty for that to be expressed in a political context. And honestly, going beyond no faculty for it to be politically expressed, no belief that it would be expressed, which makes it even worse. So it's like, yeah, people might agree with those things, but there is nothing in our politics. We don't have a parliamentary system where these things break down like that. We are basically stuck with Democrat, which bleeds off all sorts of the flavor and the feeling and the lust to expand into those emancipatory, humanistic areas, and the Republican Party who doesn't even claim it one way or the other. And so it's like, where do people go in this? And I think that was where a lot of the anger came from. I think Donald Trump was a weapon against basically what people saw that they didn't particularly like. I mean, what do you think about that? I want to get into the Biden healthcare plan. Like I said, you're the perfect person to talk to about it. But what do you think about that particular thought? Is that fair? That even though people may agree with the things that you're advocating for, there is no political space for that to be articulated into the public sphere, nor is there a belief that the political parties will.
I think you're right. And, the question is, who will create that public space? So here I came from, Charlotte, North Carolina. I was, by the way, 100% disabled. I just drank coffee all the time. And I got thrown out of a hospital after I was uninsured, almost died. And I said, that's enough. I'm not going to go to this next very prestigious job. And I built the universal healthcare movement by, online, organized uninsured people, launched it on the steps of the Capitol with Bernie Sanders and 1,000 uninsured people who were mad as hell. And I got into Congress office. That's how I got there. When I got into Congress, I realized the staff ran the place. And there were 2 or 3 things I knew I wanted to work on: universal health care, global AIDS, housing, and jobs. And I got to, at least 2 of the movements that I led. I saw the passage of very historical legislation, Affordable Care Act and PEPFAR, $15 billion a year for global AIDS pandemic, for drug treatment. So you have to have leaders that will create that political space. And we've got a lot of them. And some of them on the left will disagree with me. Reagan did create a political space for middle-class people who felt like their real estate taxes were too high, okay? Roosevelt created a political space and said, I'm going to create a New Deal. Nixon created a political space and created the EPA and open relations with China. What we're lacking in this country right now are real leaders who can bring people together. And that I call it LOL, lack of leadership. That's where we're at. We have a vacuum. We don't have leaders. King was an example of a great leader who brought everybody, in my opinion, Democrats and Republicans together, and he created a moral consensus that we should pass laws to protect, Black people from racism and segregation. But we need new leaders, and I think it's going to have to come from younger people.
Do this. Let's get to the healthcare plan, because I agree with everything you just said. Space needs to be created in the political area for that stuff to get articulated into either law or, for that matter, for people to be able to use it. Let's get to Biden's plan, and because that's a pretty good segue. Biden was very clear. He's not going to pass Medicare for all. And he said, I will veto it even if I had a Congress to put it up. So that's pretty extreme in regards to thinking on that stuff, especially since the majority of the public at this point are on favor for it. What he did say, though, and he released his health care plan, a lot of this sounds like a public option by any other name. And right here, I'll just read it. This is NBC News. Americans would have the option of buying into a Medicare-like plan or keeping their private insurance under the Biden plan, which will also aim to reverse the Trump administration's effort to undercut the law. People living in Republican-led states that fail to expand Medicaid will be given a premium-free access to Medicaid. The Biden plan will also change provisions in the Affordable Care Act to improve access to health care by eliminating the 400% income cap to tax credit eligibility, base tax credits on gold plans rather than silver plans, and to ensure that those buying insurance in individual marketplace spend 8.5% of their insurance, which was down from the previous 9.8% cap. Now, it sounds like he is basically trying to implement a public option by any other name. Is my perception of this wrong? I mean, this is never going to be what I think it is. And if I'm being honest, this is even too low for the 450,000 people that have died, meaning the government itself has failed in its responsibility to the public. And as such, they should put through a Medicare for All plan. They should be covering those medical bills. But this is what Biden came out with. And so it sounds like a public option. I'm pretty sure you've gone into it, considering your background on it. Could you explain it to us and explain what he's trying to accomplish, what he is accomplishing with the plan, etc.?
Yes. He's trying to expand Obamacare to all the uninsured. That's it. I mean, when he ran for office, that's what he said he was going to do. I'm going to expand Obamacare. I'm going to build an Obamacare. Is there a real public option? That, I have to see more of the details of what the public option. I led that effort, by the way. I led the public option effort after Baucus took off single payer. I organized the effort on public option, and it was actually killed by the Progressive Caucus.
Really? Now, why did the Progressive Caucus kill it? Because it didn't go far enough?
Because there were two staffers who felt like they didn't have the votes for it in the Senate. They were pragmatists. I just didn't agree with them, and I remember I'd be passing notes to different members of Congress, because I saw that what the staff were doing, once we agreed on a public option that was a Medicare buy-in, and then I would go to the next meeting, and then all of a sudden they're not talking about it. And I'm like, okay, I know what's happening here. They want to go to war, I'll go to war with them. So it wasn't the Progressive Caucus, it was two staffers who were in leadership. And remember, staff run the Congress. All that being said, what I think they need to do, first of all, universal health care, Medicare for all, whatever you want to call it, is the only way to go. I just got a bill for $87,000, okay? Under the congressional plan, $87,000. I went to go get some glasses yesterday, and out of nowhere, the woman at the front desk said, your plan doesn't cover glasses. I said, I'm on the Congressional Federal Blue Cross Blue Shield plan. I've been coming here for 6 years. The owner is my best friend. We have a real problem here. No, the problem was the system just decided they weren't going to cover my glasses. So private insurance has got to go. Until that happens, I think it's a real easy thing they need to do. Expand Medicaid to every uninsured person in the next 100 days and increase the reimbursement rate so that the doctors will take it. It should be at the rate of Medicare. That's the bill that they need to pass. Okay, if I was advising
quick question. I'm sorry for interrupting. We only have a couple of minutes left in this segment. I want to come back on this issue, but first, is there any chance that you can stick with us through the end of the show for another about 20 minutes at this point? We're going to be taking calls, and it'd be good to have you.
Sure.
Thank you for that. Yeah, and if anybody wants to call and get ready for it, 202-521-1320. We'll start taking calls in about 5 minutes at this point. If you have questions for Joel, again, experienced staff in Congress, a lot of experience with this stuff. Please do think those up. Get ready to call in for that. Back to this issue. You're talking about taking on the private insurance industry as a whole in the U.S. That sounds like a mammoth task. If you're wanting to undo an entire industry, obviously very profitable, there's plenty of power at play. I'm just curious, from your perspective, what mentally goes into that thought process for you? What would you have to prepare for if you wanted to do that kind of thing? How would you think about it? From within the halls of Congress, from within in the belly of the beast, so to speak. Joel, what would you bring to bear on that goal? Joel?
Well, you'd have to organize a movement. You'd have to have a fully funded, progressive, universal single-payer Medicare for all movement that doesn't exist right now, that would educate members of Congress about why we have to transition. And if you read 676, there's a real detailed part of the bill that explains how the workers would be treated, so they'd have a soft landing. But the unions. I just wrote a new bill for a California single payer bill. It really is going to be very difficult to eliminate insurance companies, okay? Because there are a lot of people who say, look, I like my private insurance. That is something that the single payer movement is going to have to wrestle with, man. There are other countries that have a private system of insurance and they have a public system that's single payer. And we might have to look at a dual system, but the other thing is the people who are unhappy with their insurance have to be able to go public and go into the Congress and hearings and briefings and the press and say, I know that's what you've heard, that we love our insurance. Guess what? We hate it. We want public insurance because it works. And that takes a lot of thinking, and that's what I did for half of my career, right? Was try to build momentum for the passage of a single payer system. But at the very, very minimum, I get everybody covered like now.
But does that mechanically change the point of view of people in Congress? Like, I have a cynical point of view of these guys, because I've never heard an argument in Congress where one person gets up, makes an argument, and the person gets up and says, you know what, that was a really good idea. I'm going to change my opinion. It seems that these guys are forced already votes, and that ultimately what takes place when these guys get out there is just theater for the audience to try to get people on their side. It's not for them internally. Am I wrong on that? I mean, like, it just comes across as very cynical politics when these guys get up there and give their speeches. It seems an already fixed opinion.
I think that's accurate. I mean, look, the way Congress works, or a General Assembly and a state assembly or any elected official, the modus operandi is get reelected. And until they hear from their constituents, and a lot of them, we want Medicare for all, or we want we want universal health care. They don't read minds, so they're going to say, well, I guess people are okay with what they have, but there has to be a universal. Look, I'm the author of 676. I wrote the bill, right, with 40 doctors, and I'm a pragmatist and I'm a realist. At the end of the day, and I'll repeat it again, we have 78 million people who are either uninsured or underinsured. They need to have an opportunity right now. If they want to get into Medicare or Medicaid, I should have that choice. I should not owe $250,000 in medical bills. I know people right now in North Carolina who have stage 3 colon cancer and have no insurance. So the first discussion that we need to have is being covered with health insurance a right or a privilege? Right now, we're not even there. We're not even a right yet. If it was a right, we wouldn't have 78 million people uninsured and underinsured. And then lastly, we have to de-link health insurance to a job.
That's big. That's a very big one. I mean, because I agree with you. I had kidney failure, no kidneys working. I had a transplant that had failed, no health insurance. And Medicare at that point had passed its 3-year cycle of things. So basically a person with a major chronic disability has no health care just because of the way the laws are passed. And for that matter, the way the companies have locked on to the job thing. We're going to bring you back, Joel. Joel Siegel is former congressional staffer, co-author of H.R. 676, the Expanded and Improved Medicare for All bill, and one of the leading architects for passage of the Affordable Care Act. He is co-founder and national director of the Justice Action Mobilization Network and nationwide multiracial climate action network. We will be taking calls on the other end with a wrap. You guys are listening to Fault Lines with Thomas and Stranahan. We will be back in a moment. We already got plenty of calls.
Fault Lines.
So Sean, what do you want to talk about today?
Well, Bob, that's easy. I want to talk about the need to stop the development of self-driving cars.
Again, Sean, you're driving me nuts. I think the self-driving car thing's already out of the gate.
No. It's never too late. See, now the leading experts in the field, I mean, just pick one, whichever one, leading experts have repeatedly warned us about the dangers of artificial intelligence. Look, I'm telling you, man, we have to stop the robots by any means necessary.
I see what you did there.
Yep.
Tune into our show By Any Means Necessary daily from 2 to 4 p.m. Eastern Time on Radio Sputnik. And don't forget to call in at 3:20 p.m. to our studio number 202-521-1320.
And if you miss us live, check us out on SputnikNews.com, Spreaker, iTunes, iHeartRadio, Spotify, or wherever you listen to podcasts to stay up to date on the latest political, social, and economic movements shaping the world around us.
Fault lines.
And we're back. You're listening to Fault Lines with Thomas and Stranahan. And this is the end of today's show. This is our wrap segment. We're taking your calls, 202-521-1320. And again, we continue to be joined by Joel Siegel, former congressional staffer, founder, co-founder of JAM, the Justice Action Mobilization Network. We've got Tarif on the line. But again, 202-521-1320. We got room for more. Tarif, calling in from New Orleans. You're on the line. What's on your mind?
I got two comments before I get to them. Free Julian Assange. And also I believe if something else happened in this country dealing with like what happened on January 6th, but something worse, God forbid, if the person's mega or if they've been to 4chan or Alice Jones website or any other political view type of person, and to do something crazy, we got 330 million people in this country, then that's going to be used to put Patriot 2 and also HR 127, which is a gun control bill. That make things even worse. And also, I also like to say, over the weekend we experienced this cold weather, the Arctic freeze, and some mechanical stuff failed, dealing with the solar panels and the wind turbines. I'm for those things, but reality just hit. It seemed like the way to go is like to put more money into fission, and also to put more money into nuclear power, maybe also thermal power to get the energy out. Because right now everybody using energy, and they're telling people in Louisiana to slow down your use of energy because they're afraid that we might have rolling brownouts or something. And look what happened to Texas. So we got to invest more infrastructure into our energy grid. So, yeah, and also stay prayed up and push for Julian Assange to be free. That's all I want to say.
Tarif, thank you for the call. Agreed on Patriot Act 2.0. And frankly, this is a little bit of a third rail issue in left-wing politics, I would say. Not that I'm on the left, but agreed on fusion energy specifically. The problem with fission energy is you get fissile material, and you need to figure out how to deal with that. And that's a tricky issue. It makes you, it has been turned into a political football. It makes you susceptible to terrorist attacks. Might seem like it's a little bit out of left wing, but if you have an attack on one of these facilities, it's like you have a low-grade nuclear bomb going off. And if you try to bury it deep, then it's potentially leaking into the groundwater. On fission, at least, on that form of nuclear energy, that's the big problem as far as I can tell. Also, of course, if the facility is not built well, then you have the potential for a breach. And clearly, whether you're looking at Chernobyl or 3 Mile Island, serious potential problems on the other side of that. And the problem with fusion, of course, is that it doesn't exist in a practical form yet. So various tokamaks in development, various tests being run on a large scale. And it seems like they're close, but they've been saying that for literally decades at this point, decade after decade after decade, they've been talking about fusion energy. But if we can get there, I'm on board with that. Anyway, we got more calls. Any takes on this tomorrow, Thomas? Or
so
Joel
in
Siegel?
Germany, we have a situation where I think they have like an uptime of like 95% or something in regards to their energy needs. It's because they invest, they build the stuff underground, and they take action to ensure things like weather, which is infinitely foreseeable to happen, are not the things that basically destroy their capacity to get energy. I think we need to invest more attention and more thought into how we produce energy and how we ensure that those things remain online and active. And one of those things, by the way, is Joe Biden can come out and say, look, we need more jobs. And I don't want to be heavy-handed by having a jobs program. However, we do need more energy independence. So I'm going to push for solar panels, and I'm going to push for our work, military organization-esque, on the home soil that goes and installs those things in their houses, that creates energy production from the standpoint of or food production, making places that have basically been run down, these factories, and turning those things into farms that can automatically create food. Look, we have all sorts of capabilities and ideas that we can put forth, especially if you are in the position of president and you have a bully pulpit to push those things through. Oftentimes, it's just the issue of imagination that is not used and utilized to make that stuff a reality. That's my point of view on it. Joel, please, your take.
I've just drafted a bill with the leading climate scientist in America. I'm a real big believer in very smart people. So his name is Professor Mark Jacobson, who's come up with a 100% clean renewable energy plan for every country in the world and every state in America. And whether it's Wall Street or your utility companies, we're moving rapidly towards solar and wind, but solar with storage. In terms of nuclear power, it takes 15 to 20 years to get a nuclear power plant online. It's too expensive. The threats that you talked about are very real. It's just too expensive and too dangerous. Solar and wind is much cheaper. That's where every country in the world is heading towards, is clean, renewable energy. We only got about 10 years to make that transition. So the bill that I've drafted with these scientists and experts will get to about 80%, 100% clean renewable energy in all energy sectors, but it's a massive job creator. You're looking at 7 million jobs, about 7 million.
Joel, thank you for that. We got more calls. We got time, I think, for one more after this one, 202-521-1320, but we'll see how this goes. We got Stedman calling in. Stedman, you're on the line. What's going on, man?
I'd like to recommend everybody in the chat, everybody listening, when you get a chance, look up some Black Panther interviews. Huey Newton, you can look up Firing Line, William F. Buckley interviews, Eldridge Cleaver, he interviewed Huey Newton. Listen to some Fred Hampton speeches, some interviews. Listen to H. Rap Brown and Stokely Carmichael, a.k.a. Kwame Ture. And you'll see the necessity to protect, especially violent speech, if you want to be an anti-establishment or revolutionary. I also want to say it is telling that two of Jamal's biggest supporters on impeachment seem to be operating from the same ideological playbook, meaning mainstream points of view. I don't want to really get into that. What I will say is I've kind of had a change of heart, and I think it may be a result of Valentine's Day. Jamal has convinced me today with the conversation that Trump should have been impeached. To that end, I think Jamal's show should also be canceled on YouTube because it is dangerous. Some of his talking points, I think, have radicalized me. And I feel like if I listen to more of his videos, I may be forced to commit some government action against the Republican Party or capitalists or the Democratic Party or the people who cheated Bernie. So YouTube needs to keep me safe and all other viewers of Jamal's channel safe in case we may do things in his name that we know he wants done, because he wants the medical system changed. He wants Medicare for all, health care for all, a living wage, and they're not willing to do it. So protect us all, YouTube. Protect us all.
Look, I accept that, right? I accept that. Look, it's subjective. We're awash in points of view. But I have zero qualms with saying that me on this channel is dramatically different than the President of the United States with the bully pulpit screaming bloody murder into a mic that he was cheated. And that, it has nothing to show for it, by the way. Because, again, on this channel, we were okay with Donald Trump doing the investigations and that stuff. If you want to take me down for it, fair enough. We can make our arguments as to why. But yeah, that's fair. Is what it is. Shane, what do you thought?
Oh, come on, though, man. Come on. Well,
it's
but
ridiculous.
Here's the thing.
Yes,
that's a self-defeating argument, literally.
I'm giving him.
Well, but it was good. Stedman, I'll be honest, my hat's off to you. That was not only funny, but in its own way, of course, it was on point. Good argument there. But Jamal, isn't that kind of a self-defeating? I don't think you should be taken off of YouTube, and I don't think you do either. So even though you're playing along with his argument, no, we both think that's ridiculous. And to some extent. But the same does apply to Donald Trump. You're just saying things. Trump was just saying things. Trump called for them to peacefully march on Congress. We don't have enough time to get back into a huge back and forth over impeachment. And at this point, we haven't even included Joel in this conversation. We've only got like 2 minutes. Joel, I'm curious. What's your take on that?
Which he made some interesting points. Which point in particular?
Let's go with the more controversial one. That Jamal, he's basically leveling the same argument at Jamal that Jamal was arguing against Trump, which is this guy is radicalizing people. He was doing it knowingly. There's a malice aforethought, whatever the case. What's your take on the idea that YouTube is justified in taking Jamal's channel down because he's radicalizing people like Stedman, which I don't buy. I think that's silly, but what's your take?
So, my background is legal, right? So the FBI is really good at designating who's really dangerous and who is not, right? So the Constitution does not protect all speech. My brother Jamie Raskin, I've been brothers for 31 years. I was so proud of him. There's just certain speech that's not protected, right? So if you're going to incite, if speech will incite violence,
1 minute,
or hatred that could lead to violence, I do think that speech should be banned. I don't think that. What
if people are just hateful, and some people are just hateful and violent, either because they've been made that way or because they are that way, and some speech is just going to incite them because speech serves to incite sometimes. I mean, like it's painting with a broad brush, and it can be used against Republicans, but against Democrats. It could be used against any leader who's calling for a protest, as far as I can tell, of any form if that gets violent. We don't have much time. In maybe 10 seconds here, Joel, what's your take?
I'm a hardliner on the Constitution. I think that when you use speech that will incite people to violence and hatred, there has to be a punitive response.
15.
All right, I hear you. We're out of time. We're joined by Joel Siegel. Joel, thank you for staying with us. Thank you, everybody, for listening. Thank you for calling in. Thank you to our guests and staff, and Jamarl, my co-host on the show. We will be back tomorrow, folks, signing off Fault Lines with Thomas and Stranahan.
Fault Lines with Thomas and Stranahan. Another one is in the record books. Guys, I've been, over the time that YouTube is screwed with my channel, we have gained nearly 600 subscribers over the course of the week. So I want to thank you for giving YouTube an FU and a middle finger in their attempts to destroy the channel. The channel has basically succeeded in spite of. On top of that, I've also moved to Rockfin. I've been streaming live my content there. And so you guys are more than welcome to join me there when I'm doing my shows, especially while Google is shut down. When Google comes back up, I will also continue to be doing special or specific content on Rockfin. So definitely, if you're joining me here, check out my account on Rockfin. It's under the Progressive Soapbox or my name. You should be able to find it. And look, the account has been quite good. I'll put it, I'm going to start putting it in my blurb at the bottom, even when YouTube comes back up. And they allow streaming and everything else. So I hate to split the content like this. But if there's going to be any kind of movement, I do need to position people to realize, hey, there's something special at Rockfin that you can take a look at, with the hope that those two things become a little bit more normal in people's viewing patterns, where they would be able to gravitate towards the other. It's not that I'm leaving YouTube. It's not that. It's more so that I'm going to probably be doing both. And the content on both are going to be their own content, even though it's the same channel. UFO Talk, and there's also going to be Chess Night or Chess Talk. Those are going to be two main or specific segments that are going to be had on that platform. So definitely be checking out the Rockfin to join me. But thank you all for joining us. Fault Lines, another one is in the record books. And I'm going to end it here. Like, share, and of course,